And before we get started, we're going to start with a prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. I haven't discussed this with our members here, but I'll go ahead and ask Jeremy, would you mind? So Representative Harrelson will lead us in prayer, and Representative Pendergraph, if you'd lead us in the pledge.
God, we just thank you so much for the opportunity we have to be here today. God, as we discuss the finances of a state, God, I pray you would lead us and you would guide us. You would lead our steps as we walk this out. God, we understand and know that the wisdom we carry pales in a vast comparison to your wisdom. So God, we need your wisdom on this stuff. As we talk about wildfires and talk about the process and plan and funding of them, God, I pray that you would just keep us attentive and give us wisdom. God, as we walk through the discussions just with the communities and the funding of communities and all the different things we have over the next 2 days, God, I pray that you would just put your hand on this. God, we know that you care about this state. You care about the financial structure and status of this state. And God, we just thank you that you don't ask us to do it alone. I pray that you would be with us now. Bless every person as they travel here and travel home, as they come and they go, as they're away from their families. God, I pray protection over us and over those that are traveling with us. And I just pray that you'd be with us today as we go through this material. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, born and unborn.
Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us in that. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we bring this meeting to order. Parking wise, out front, if you parked out front, there's a 2-hour limit, and we are looking for some additional revenue here in Campbell County. So feel free to stay there, but we'll be breaking at 10 o'clock. So if any of you parked out front, you can park as long as you'd like in the parking garage on the west side. With that, I'll go ahead and bring this meeting to order. And thank you very much for being here. Folks, I want to open up with a statement and give my co-chair an opportunity to speak as well. So we have a very busy summer here in appropriations. And if we go back to Senate File 152, during that bill's effort through the legislature, it was amended so that the task force that was a part of that bill was removed. And that was done with a commitment from this committee to replace that task force and do that work, which is going to be a lot of work for all of us. But I think we're up to the challenge. One of the things that we will be hampered by is the fact that we are not firefighters. We are citizens of the citizen legislature. So we will have to work a little harder to understand the lingo and what's going on. And I expect everybody to do their due diligence and have that help aid that was given to us as far as the terms in your paperwork ready. If you have a question, hopefully everyone has read their materials and is prepared so that we can go swiftly through this. I think last night in our gathering, it was thought that there's not nearly enough material to take us all day, but talking to the forester, I think that there really is. And so we will see how we do as far as getting through this. My co-chair and I both believe that there's a potential that we will need additional days to really do this work and do it well. It will save one step by the task force being this committee. That task force will not have to present to this committee. But in the meantime, there's a lot of knowledge for us to gain and understand, and we really want to take this very seriously. We are looking to do 3 things with wildfire prevention and suppression. One is to look at the processes and the methodology that we manage that from the state level. And compare that to how other states are doing it to see if it's time to change how we do things. Another is to look at the funding and how we do that, and should we change that? Is it time to increase that? Are we really preparing ourselves for future disasters? And I think our staff has done a great job of providing us some materials as far as forward-looking and preparing the state to deal with disasters. And thirdly, is the funding itself. We want to know, is the methodology that we're funding appropriate? and have we got enough money put away there? And so with that, tomorrow we'll move on to sales tax distribution. And while we're working on that, we're going to look at the direct distribution to cities and towns. And that also is a large job for this committee to take on. And then finally, tomorrow we'll also cover the DD waiver, which is something that many of our constituents and a few members of this committee are very, very passionate about. And so we want to make sure that whatever's happening with federal funding and state funding, we take care of those people that are under the DD waiver, and we do our due diligence as a government. With that, I do need to do a little bit of explaining. Several of us up here are wearing red jackets now, and I want to explain that because you're going to see more and more red jackets, I think, for the near future, and hopefully they will go away eventually. It's not my favorite color, really. So the red jackets have to do with our budget and our forecasted expenditures. So based on the way we spend money as a state, we put out forecasts as to where we're going to be in the near future. And by near future, I mean the next two, excuse me, bienniums. And so if we look at our forecast, which is always posted just outside the Appropriations Committee at the Capitol, we are going to be in the red jackets, in just our next biennium by an amount of 184 million. You can always criticize these forecasts because they're best guess, but our Craig and the consensus revenue estimating group has always been within about 5%. So if you want to add or subtract from that $184 million negative in the next biennium, you can anticipate that we're going to be darn close to that. And then in the next biennium, this would be 2029 and 2030, we're forecast to be $686 million in the negative. Now, from the good work we did in the last session, we're looking pretty good on the state spending side. So those numbers that I just shared with you is actually on our education spending side. And I'll say something a little bit political here. We may or may not be able to effectuate reductions in spending on the education side. So that means that the other side of government will have to make up those differences. And so this committee is going to work very hard on doing that. And hopefully we can turn that around in short order and we can start wearing black jackets for being in the black. And with that having been said, Representative Alamand has graciously presented us with some bobbleheads, and they have the red jackets on them. I'm a little concerned that the political opponents will get a hold of one and use it as a target, but at least I can rejoice that they're burning some gunpowder if they do that. So, what's that? Go ahead.
Folks, these are unique bobbleheads, and that I'll only go this way.
They're blue. Oh, they can't go.
Okay, and along those lines with the budget, in 2017, the state of Wyoming, after I don't know how long Standards and Poor's has been in place, but we had been rated as a AAA bond entity, and in 2017 that changed. We moved from a AAA rating down to a AA rating. It was a AA plus, and then in 2020 that changed from AA plus to just AA. And so these efforts really are to turn that around. I think the state of Wyoming should have financing that takes care of the most important things that government should take care of, and that our citizens should be proud of the way we manage our money. So those are going to be the goals, and we'll be working very hard on that during this time. And so then I do want to say, as far as, I don't think there's anybody in the room that's going to get out of hand, but we do have decorum rules, and we'll stick to those. My good co-chair, I heard him in a meeting announce that if you get off topic, that will be out of order, and I think we'll stick to that rule. We'll try to keep everybody on topic, and I often say this at the beginning of a session. There'll be none of this whoop whoop. Oh no, you didn't. So keep it calm in here, folks. And with that, co-chair, would you like to say anything?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. No, looking forward to this. The Senate's looking forward to working with the House on all these challenges, and we're ready to go. So.
Very good. I will make an announcement that was just shared with us for everyone. And I'll kind of put this into context. My good co-chair has voiced publicly concern about the price of oil and what that would do to impact our budgets. We just found out that the Big Beautiful Bill has a provision in it to reduce the FMRs, the federal mineral royalties on coal. And that's a good thing for our industry, may extend the life of that industry, but it will cost the state, unless we see an amendment to that, around $50 million per year. So there's pressure down on our revenues, and so we want to keep that in mind as we work on budgets. But again, this summer, we're really not working on the budgets, although many of us will be working behind the scenes to prepare for that because it's going to be a big task. On the other hand, these three subjects that we're working on now are going to be extremely important. They're going to take a lot of work. And like I said, I think we're up to the challenge. So with that, let's get started. Mr. Richards, would you like to say a few things?
Good morning, members of the committee. For roll call, Senator Driscoll. Here. Senator Garou.
Here.
Senator Larson.
Here.
Senator Smith.
Here.
Representative Almond. Representative Angelos. Representative Harrelson.
Here.
Representative Pendergraph.
Here.
Representative Sherwood.
Here.
Representative Smith.
Here.
Co-Chairman Salazar.
Here.
Chairman Bear.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. And with that, I think we'll start with our fire marshal or our fire warden. And if you gentlemen would like to come up and bring up the forester as well. Do you have something to present? Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. I should get my schedule out there. Thank you.
Good morning,
Martineau.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Martineau. I am a senior fiscal analyst with the Legislative Service Office. We provided a white paper for your consideration for the wildfires. It should be item number 2-01 in your meeting material index.
Ms. Martineau, before I ask you to proceed, I'll just say this, that I hope that you can just summarize this for the public, anything that is poignant for the public to be aware of. I'm hoping that the committee has already read word for word what you've drafted here, and we really appreciate this encompassing document. Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would first like to thank the Wyoming State Forestry Division and Forester Norris in particular for their time and their expertise as I developed this white paper. And to assist in this discussion, as well as your discussion later today, Attachment A in your white paper is actually from the Wyoming Cooperative Wildland Fire Management and Stafford Agreement Response Agreement, our ACT Response Agreement, pardon me. And that's a glossary of commonly used terms. There's quite a bit of jargon and terms that have gone around in the discussions last December and last year when discussing wildfires. And I thought that might be useful to have a document just to look at in case there's a term that comes up that you might be curious about. To begin, as described on page 1 of this white paper, wildfires in Wyoming is largely a decentralized operation. The local governments maintain and manage their own operational independence when it comes to suppression, finance, billing, and incident response for wildfires. On the state's behalf, the State Forestry Division in the Office of State Lands and Investments really does play a supporting role and provides some financial assistance, expertise, and resources, particularly aviation, when it comes to wildfires. But that's all within their current statutory authority. That is why when we're talking about wildfires today and later on, it is very important to consider the location of a wildfire when you're looking at funding. Going to funding, on the first page, I did try to summarize some of the main state mechanisms for funding, just so that you have that information. A couple of key points. Wildfires really occur in 3 phases. So there's mitigation, so that's the upfront work to make sure that forests are safe from wildfires. There's the suppression, which is what we spend quite a bit of money in the state of Wyoming on in our focus. And then there is recovery. And as we will talk about, quite a bit of the funds is going towards suppression. As an overview, the state really has quite a few mechanisms, but some of them aren't wildfire specific. So there's, of course, direct legislative appropriations. There are 2 dedicated accounts. There's some borrowing authority, a transfer authority, which is also known as the B11 process, which you are familiar with, contingency or emergency funds, as well as some indirect support provided by other state agencies. In total, for the 25-26 biennium, as shown in Figure 1 on page 2, there was $176.9 million that you appropriated for wildfire suppression and mitigation and recovery. I think Figure 1 does a good job of showing kind of the differences in the funding that we have here in Wyoming. So in the 2024 budget session, which is shown in dark blue in this graphic, the legislature authorized $34.1 million in direct funding to agencies and $21 million in contingency funds. Subsequently, following the 2024 fire season and then into this past session that you had, in light gray, you added some additional funds. There was the $2.3 million in contingency funds. There is $49.4 million for recovery-related grants, $20 million to repay the borrowing authority that was exercised, an additional $20 million to replenish the emergency fire suppression account, and then $30 million for new borrowing authority. It's important, as I noted, that when you're looking at this $176.9 million, not all of it is exclusive to wildfires. In fact, 23 million of those can be used for other emergencies that may come up that the governor may want to deploy funds to. When looking at the state of Wyoming, the Office of State Lands and Investment State Forestry Division in particular is our primary entity that's responsible for wildfire response coordination, and they receive the vast majority of the appropriations. In Table 1 at the top of page 3, for this biennium, the 25-26 biennium, of that $176.9 million, $74.1 million of those went to the Office of State Lands and Investments. $52.1 million went to the Emergency Fire Suppression Account. $7.6 million went to Unit 0401, which is our primary unit for wildfires and fire suppression. And $14.4 million went to the Fire Protection Revolving Account. The Office of State Lands and Investment is also in charge of our aviation. That is a critical and really expensive component to wildfire funding, in particular when I was doing my research. And they hold our Wyoming State Hell Attack program, as well as those aviation-related contracts for the pilot and the mechanic for the Hell Attack program, as well as those single-engine air tankers. Additionally, Forester Norris shared that for the 2025 fire season, an additional medium helicopter will be deployed, as well as additional single-engine air tankers. Also, in one of the parts that the Office of State Lands and Investment has is this smoke busters as part of their cooperative agreement collaboration that they have with the Department of Corrections. These are pre-release minimum security inmate hand crews that are based out of the Wyoming Honors Conservation Camp in Newcastle. The State Forestry Division takes care of the support, training, and supervision, and the Department of Corrections takes care of the conservation camp and its own personnel. Currently, we only have one active smoke busters crew. We did have a few, but with reductions over the years, that has been reduced down to one.
Ms. Martineau, go ahead, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So sorry to interrupt you real quick on that. So talking real quick, can we dive a little deeper into that smoke buster crews? So you said we had 3 that went down to 1, or was it 2 that went down to 1? 3, right?
3.
And we're down to 1.
And my question is this, because I've being on judiciary and looking at our numbers on that side, it isn't like we're missing, it isn't like we have a lack of people. So why is it? Is it a lack of funding? What caused the 3 to 1? I just wanted to get an answer on that. That was a question I had.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Haroldson, I will defer to Forester Norris if she would like to answer that question. My understanding it was a funding related issue.
Forester Norris, if you wouldn't mind come forward. And this is how we're going to do this. We want to go expeditiously through the material. So we're going to have the presenters presenting, and if this body has any questions, get my attention and we'll interrupt at that time and get that taken care of. And Forester Norris, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, and we're going to cover quite a bit of this when we go through state forestry staffing. It's a combination. We really struggle to get inmates to it's a voluntary program, so they have to voluntarily sign up. We had a reduction starting in 2017. We could not get we were competing. We couldn't keep 3 crews going. So we ended up having a closure of the Riverton Honor Camp and trying to keep 2 crews going just over out of Newcastle. What you're going to find is the Department of Corrections really changed the Newcastle building. There's different types of facilities that are there. They have women now there. They have a recovery program that are there. And we've, over the years, 2020 really changed the inmate programs. And when you have a Department of Corrections that are paying for beds in Mississippi and Texas and all sorts of things, these type of inmates typically go out on parole much earlier. And so this is across the board, across the West, from Nevada to Arizona, they're seeing massive reductions in the inmate programs because these type of personnel would be out on probation.
Thank you, Forrester. Follow-up? Okay, thank you. Ms. Martineau, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, there are, thank you, Forrester Norris. The Office of State Lands and Investments has 2 dedicated accounts that they oversee, and these are the primary mechanism outside of aviation that the state really does have in terms of supporting the locals as they fight wildfires. First is the Emergency Fire Suppression Account. This was started in 1986 and has continued through. This account helps counties to cover those expenses associated with wildfires when they exceed local capacity. They are not intended for normal use for their daily operations. Participation is voluntary, and counties are required to pay an annual assessment that is calculated and shown in your document on page 4. And currently, all 23 counties are participating in the Emergency Fire Suppression Account. The account receives funds from 4 primary sources: the annual assessments that counties pay, the direct legislative appropriations that you authorize, investment income on those funds, as well as any reversions that occur within the State Forestry Division that are unexpended or unobligated in a given biennium. Attachment, pardon me, the legislature so far has appropriated $65.7 million to this account, of which $55 million of those have occurred since fiscal year 2013, the most occurred last year. As of April 30th, 2025, the current cash balance of the account is $52.5 million. And according to the State Forestry Division, as one caveat, due to the multi-jurisdictional nature of wildfires, as well as this delay in reimbursement cycles, this cash balance that you see that we've presented isn't always accurate. In some instances, it does not account for the expenditures or the reimbursements that are pending and incoming, or and will be coming. For example, for the 2024 fire season, the $52 million does not take into account the $42 million that they incurred last fire season. For additional context, wildfires in the 2024 fire season were incredibly higher compared to other years for this emergency fire suppression account in particular. On annual average between 2016 and 2024 was 11 authorized or eligible fires. In fire season 24, there were 25 fires that were emergency fire suppression account eligible. And you can see on figure 3 on page 5, there's a map that we created just to show you where those wildfires occurred last year.
Ms. Martineau,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. This chart, figure 2, doesn't show the dollar amounts, just shows the top dollar amount. Could we, before we're done here, get some of these other points
Yes.
in there so we know, and as well a sort of last 5-year running average of that balance? I understand that it's anecdotal because we can't tell what the demands are on that account, but I'd like to kind of know where the balance is typically at on the EFSA account. And one other piece of information that maybe Forrester Norris can prepare is I'd like to know these 23 counties, not all of them, I found data on fires using the EFSA account. So I'd like to have an idea of these other counties that have never benefited, but are members. We're glad they're paying into the account, but just which counties have never had a wildfire and just how that's continuing on so that we can continue to have that kind of participation. You don't need to answer that. Maybe the forester can get that, but I wanted to mention that while we're talking about EFSA.
Yes, and Mr. Chairman, that graphic, the reason it doesn't have the page number or the dollar amounts for the balance is attachment B provide, pardon me, attachment B provides that history as an Excel, like as in a table in the back of the white paper. And so it does have that historic EFSA ending balance. The numbers were just a bit too small when I put them into the graphic at that time. But I will get you that 5-year average and that additional information as well, sir.
Thank you very much.
Of
Please
course.
proceed.
Thank you. Moving on to the second account, this is the Fire Protection Revolving Account that is also managed by the Office of State Lands and Investment. This account was established in 1999, and it's used to receive funds from local and county fire service entities, as well as those payments for billable fire expenditures received by the state forester for the 321 pieces of equipment deployed to state fire departments. Next is borrowing authority. The legislature has historically authorized the governor to borrow up to $20 million from the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account or another account for wildfire suppression. In 2025, Senate File 152, the legislature, increased that authorization from $20 million to $30 million, and you also removed a previous restriction that they had to use other contingency funds before they could access these funds. Speaking of next, we have the transfer authority, and that is known as the B11 process. And that is where the governor has some limited ability to move funds between agencies or within agencies. And so he can move funds for wildfire suppression if he would like, as he would with any emergency. However, because he cannot create general funds, that is net to zero, he has to move that from somewhere else. So his ability to use this is restricted to the amount of money that may be available. Next, we have the special contingency funds or emergency funds that are available to the governor's office to address all sorts of emergencies, not just wildfires. There's this special contingency emergency response fund in the governor's office, and that was fully depleted last year during the 2024 fire season. And in Senate File 152, the legislature restored that $1 million so that those funds would be available should they be needed. Then there is the Disaster Contingency Fund in the Office of Homeland Security. Again, during the 2024 fire season, because of that previous requirement on the borrowing authority, this fund was also exhausted and replenished in the Senate File 152. This was $1.2 million. Finally, in 2021, there was House Bill 150, which created a $10 million automatic annual continuing appropriation to the governor's office to address emergencies. This fund is not a part of his standard budget, nor do the funds remain and kind of accumulate. At the end of each year, those are reverted back if they are not used.
Ms. Martineau, can you tell us which account automatically transfers that till 10 million? Where does it come from?
The Legislative Stabilization Reserve account, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I'm also going to want some information on these accounts as far as a 10-year average on non-wildfire expenditures for emergencies. If we could have an idea of what else this account is being used for all of these accounts, it would be helpful in the future. Thank you.
Of course, Mr. Chairman. Next in this section, we have the other state agencies. As I had mentioned previously, the Office of State Lands Investment is where the bulk of the funding does occur for wildfires, but there are some other agencies that have related activities. At the top of this, we have the Governor's Office and the Office of Homeland Security. They respond to wildfires as they would to any other emergency in the state. And so their support provides options and resources that would not otherwise be available. There is no dedicated funding for wildfires, but that support is always available. Money that has gone to another agency is the Wyoming Military Department. In footnotes 1 and 2 in the 2024 budget bill, the legislature authorized the military department to have a number of federally funded positions. As long as they're 100% federally funded, they're allowed to have those positions. And so they're using a few of those for firefighters. Additionally, during the same, so in 2024 in that budget bill, in section 343, the legislature also authorized borrowing authority for the military specifically if there's any fires that are on military lands. So they have a similar borrowing authority where they can take from the Fire Protection Revolving Account, the Public Welfare Emergencies Contingency Fund, or the LSRA if those both are exhausted. State Parks and Cultural Resources does not have any primary dedicated funds, but they do kind of act as a front line. They enforce those fire restrictions. They do help with initial notification once fires are noted and do help with those lands. Additionally, the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust is primarily focused on mitigation and recovery, and they do quite a bit with the invasive grasses and other species to ensure that lands are prepared and ready or taken care of after wildfires. $49 million from Senate File 152 went to the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust specifically for these grants to address the 2024 fire season.
Smart now.
Yes, sir.
I don't see the director of the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Trust. Will we be hearing from him during this time frame?
Mr. Chairman, I do not believe we'll be hearing from him here at this
Okay.
time.
Okay. We will want to get an update as to how that expenditure is going on the invasive grasses. That is part of the mitigation that we're talking about in this committee. And we want to make sure that we're taking all those things into account. So if we could get an update for the committee sometime soon. Let's say definitely before our next meeting, but if we could get that in the next couple of weeks. I know the director's been keeping me updated. I hope he's been keeping everybody updated. It'd be great if we could include that in public information for the public. So maybe next meeting, that'd be best. Thank you. Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the last agency is the Department of Fire Prevention and Electrical Safety. They do have a state fire academy that helps train individuals, but the wildfire curriculum is entirely administered by the State Forestry Division. Going back to a point I made earlier about the location of wildfires, land ownership in Wyoming is quite unique. When you look at page 8, figure 4, you can see the land distribution. I thought this would be important to include. Forest Norris made some comments in the December budget hearings about the location of the wildfire last year and kind of that impact on our funding abilities. And as you can see, comparatively, most of the state and privately owned lands in the east are in the eastern half of the state, whereas there's quite a bit of federal lands in the western half. This is an important concept that I wanted to share because if there are fires on federal lands, those are typically addressed by the federal government. In particular, in Wyoming, the U.S. Department of Interior or the U.S. Forest Service. They respond to those primarily. On state and private lands, the local jurisdictions, so your cities, your towns, your counties, your fire protection districts, those are the individuals who are responsible for wildfires on those lands. Funding for local fire departments, and I did not go into this too much simply because we're focusing on what is at the state level, but for background, is primarily derived from those local property taxes, the local general funds that they put into that as well, local cooperative agreements and grants that they're able to secure. Based on data for the fiscal year 2024 from the Department of Audit and the Department of Revenue, in total, cities and towns, 17 of the 23 counties, the 65 special fire protection districts, and 6 fire protection joint powers boards that we have in the state collectively expended $130 million on all fire services in fiscal year 2024. As an important note, similar to the state funding, this is not all just for wildfire response. This is for response to fires that may occur in Cheyenne or here in Gillette and other areas, not just those wildfires that may occur. Another important concept when discussing funding is this idea of mutual aid. In addition to local funding, state funding, federal funding, there's this concept that there are cooperative agreements and mutual aid restriction or items that are in place that set timeframes and the amount of resources locals are responsible for before they can seek aid from others. And so usually this is the initial attack and like the first 12 hours, 6 hours, 24 hours that they're responsible for, which means that your local jurisdictions are bearing the full cost for those first 24 hours. And because fire costs are reimbursed, that can be a burden if there are multiple concurrent fires that are ongoing. Page 10 provides a summary of the 2 agreements that primary agreements that we participate in currently, as well as what those mutual aid agreements are for the counties currently. Lastly, unlike tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes that kind of have a way to gauge the magnitude of how big a wildfire is or how impactful that is, wildfires really don't have that or an easy system to look at. And so I worked with the State Forestry Division to see if there was something we could do to contextualize how big are these fires, how many resources do they need? What do they look like? And so there is something called, it's a nationally used system, the Incident Command System Management Types. And I thought this would be useful to give you kind of a gauge just to put how big was a fire? How massive was it? And this helps categorize those fires by their complexity, their command structure, the duration, the resources that were needed. And so this scale goes from type 1, which is the most complex. These include the most resources. They're very intensive fires, kind of like Mullen in 2020 or the Buffalo Complex that we had last year, all the way through type 5s, which are very single engine. They can be handled in a day. There might be a 40-acre fire that burns that they don't need very much resources, but they can address it pretty quickly. And most importantly, just as a note, the wildfires will fluctuate between these. So they can begin as a type 5 and immediately go to type 1, or they can be a type 3 and just kind of stay there. Tying this all together, all of this information, during the 2024 fire season, Forester North shared that there were 2,000 wildfires statewide of varying types and sizes. Of these wildfires, State Forestry categorized the majority, so 98% of them, as type 3 or type 4 or type 5, so that least complex type. So put another way, in calendar year 24, your local jurisdictions were able to address the vast majority of these fires on their own. And most of these even occurred through mutual aid, which means they didn't even need to bill this through the state or the federal government for those wildfires. That does mean that the 25 wildfires that were kind of left over, that were emergency fire suppression account eligible, were the big fires, were the very costly fires. And so finally, on page 12, we wanted to provide for you some of what those wildfires looked like and cost from that fire season. And the purpose of this table is to kind of, again, tie it all together at the end to give you some framework to kind of compare the costs of the fires, to look at the resources that were necessary. And as you're looking at the amount of funding, the resources and the types of operations that you may wish to pursue to help address wildfires in Wyoming, it gives you an idea of what these wildfires cost, what kind of resources they take, and how much they may one wildfire may take versus another. So as a great example in this table, the Buffalo Complex, which in fact impacted Johnson County, Campbell County, Bighorn, and some of Montana, 449,000 acres. And Forster Norris will go over these details more, I think, in her presentation. $17.8 million, almost 1,000 individuals who were involved in those wildfires. The Pleasant Valley fire comparatively was a type 3, so kind of a medium complexity fire, 23,000 acres, about 100 individuals participating in that fire, $3.5 million. And you can see the cost per acre difference in some of these fires. And that has a lot to do with communities, what structures were involved, where these fires occurred, what types of fires, a whole nother white paper I could write if I needed. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to provide that context, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Martineau? Seeing none, we'll continue on. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that effort, Ms. Martineau. All right, Forster Norris, if you'll come on up. And Warden Fox and Warden Cooper, please. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your being here before us today. I think this is going to be pretty regular throughout the summer. And so let's get right into it.
All right. Well, good morning. Good morning, Chairman Bear, Chairman Salzar, members of the Joint Appropriations Committee. My name is Kelly Norris. I'm the Wyoming State Forester. I'm going to let both chiefs just introduce themselves briefly here today.
Mr. Chairman, J.R. Fox. I'm the fire warden for Campbell County. I'm also the president of the Wyoming Fire Chiefs Association.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Shad Cooper. I'm the county fire warden for Sublette County, and I also serve as the president of the Wyoming Rural Fire Association and president of the Wyoming Fire Advisory Board.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank the Legislative Service Office staff for their efforts in developing the in-depth look into wildland fire management in Wyoming, as well as their support in providing you all these handouts. So well done, great job. We're also going to be having 2 virtual presentations this afternoon right after lunch. We are going to have Montana is going to virtual and call in and give a presentation, as well as the State Forestry Arizona. So that'll be occurring today as well. So thank you to all the staff helping us coordinate all of these moving parts. We're in an incident. So we're going to kick off our presentation focusing on last year's 2024 fire season. Wyoming had a historic fire season last year. We had over 2,000 fires recorded for over 850,000 acres. To give you some perspective of the sort of fire season we had, we are the fifth state for the most acres burned in 2024. The breakdown of numbers of fires and acres by county is provided to you on your fourth page here in your handout. And we broke it out between all land fires, and then we broke it out between your private and state land fires per county. And you're going to see we had just under 600,000 acres burned on state and private lands. So only Oregon, Texas, California, and Idaho burned more acres than Wyoming last year. We burned double the acres of Montana and Arizona, and other states like Utah, Colorado, Nevada, and New Mexico all burned less than 100,000 acres. So these are important numbers to consider as we work through today, look at the resources, capacity, and funding Wyoming has to handle the size of fire response, as well as the other states that they're contributing to when they're handling their fire acres. As with historic acres burned, especially on private and state lands, along came substantial costs to suppress the fires. As Elizabeth said, we are still waiting to complete cost share payouts with Wyoming BLM and the U.S. Forest Service from last year's fires. And because of this, we still do not know what the total suppression costs are from the 2024 fires. Our current estimate still stands at $55 million. Few points I want to highlight about last year's fire season was how many fire management assistant grant or FMAG fires we had and when we had them. So on the very first cover of your page, it goes through the 4 FMAG fires. And the first fire that we had that was approved was on March 1st. It's Happy Jack Fire. The last FMAG fire that we had that we approved was on September 27th with the good old Elk Fire. So we had FMAG fires starting in March all the way through into October last year, just to give you an idea. So these fires, to become an FMAG fire, they have to hit certain thresholds that are impacting our community, such as having a certain number of residential homes evacuated or threatened. At certain times during the summer or fall, hundreds of Wyoming homeowners were evacuated from their homes, while thousands were put on different stages of being ready to evacuate. We had almost 2,000 firefighters helping manage 2 large fires in October, both over 90,000 acre fires, while during the same time we continue to respond to wildfires across Wyoming with our own state contracted aviation, the Smokebuster Inmate Hand Crew, and the rural firefighting resources. We extended all state aviation contracts, and both single engine air tankers and our helicopter responded to fires on their last day of contract, which was the end of October. A key highlight on your handout that I want to point out is an event that happened, and that's the lightning storm that started on August 20th and crossed eastern Wyoming all day on the 21st, and that's right up top in the Flat Rock picture. So from August 21st through August 23rd, Wyoming closed 3 major highways for wildfires and numerous other local roads. So we cut off access to families, to businesses, hospitals, schools, and tourists. Our local firefighters went from focusing on putting out the fire to transitioning to point protection to protect homes, ranches, corrals, the livestock, people's livelihoods with the engines they had while the fires just kept pushing on. We couldn't stop them. We just had to protect what we had. The situation I'm describing, this didn't just happen once. This happened multiple times all last summer. It happened during Pleasant Valley. It happened during House Draw, Flat Rock, Elk Fire. And I'm going to go back to the event that occurred in August. Wyoming Homeland Security, in coordination with Campbell County and Johnson County, were able to get an approved disaster declaration. So what that means is a certain percentage of the Flat Rock, the Constitution, and House Draw fires will now be federally reimbursed through this declaration. So I want to do a big kudos to Director Budd and her team, as well as both counties, collecting all the reports, the data, the finances to get that, to receive that significant declaration. In your handouts, we provided you a breakdown of accomplishments from State Forestry's aviation program through that handout, as well as our Smokebuster Inmate Hand Crews. We've also provided you information on the wildland fire training and volunteer assistance grant funds that we pass through to the local fire departments for training and equipment, helping in preparedness. Also, on the last few pages of this handout, we provided you 2024 accomplishments on fuels mitigation grants that we subrecipient 2 counties. In total, 26 defensible spaces and 529 acres of field treatments were completed within 6 counties from those grants in 2024.
Forrester Norris?
Yes.
While we're on mitigation here, you mentioned the August 2021 lightning storm and that there were other lightning storms. This isn't the first year we've had lightning storms. Was there a difference that we are aware of in the fuels at this point? I've heard some things, but I'd like to hear from you if you have determined any kind of differences in fuels that made this a worse situation than we've seen in the past.
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. We actually just had thousands of lightning strikes just a couple weeks ago go through Wyoming in a very similar fashion. There was a lot of conditions at play that happened. We had days of red flags, months of drought, right, conditions. We were just primed, and the wind conditions that came with this storm also was part of the situation that made it so difficult to get around these. At the same time, these lightning strikes started these fires. It wasn't just lightning. We also had wind events that broke power lines. We had human-caused fires going on at the same time. We had lightning-caused fires going on. We believe some of the fires in the southern part of the state that were occurring were also occurring during from arsonists. So there was all a buildup of conditions that were occurring, but it was, I mean, you know, out of the 1,031 lightning strikes in Weston County, about 17 of those caused fires that night that we were aware of. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but there was a lot at play at that time that was occurring with the right conditions to start fires.
Forrester Norris, what I want to share with you is just what I've heard anecdotally. And if you could confirm that, it doesn't have to be right now, but it may be something, you know, as we look forward, if the conditions happen again. But what I was told was that the grass was taller than it usually is due to a very wet season the year before. And therefore, that wind that you mentioned allowed it to move much faster. If you go out and walk through the fields around here and on BLM, it's kind of patchy. So the shorter it is, the harder it is to travel very quickly. But when it gets tall, that's a different story. So if you could just confirm that, and maybe we can keep that as one of the things we track as far as fuels as we try to mitigate. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yes, there was an extensive amount of fuels that were grown out from the year before with the amount of moisture that came with it. Plus, on top of that, we did not have a real snowpack to flatten that grass down. And so that did have an impact in how that grass stood at the same time the winds came.
Certainly, lots of conditions came together, and I'd forgotten that was part of the information I received too, is the snowpack made a big difference. So, you know, I assume, well, maybe I shouldn't assume that, but these are conditions that you guys are all watching and looking for, and we can kind of prepare based on the knowledge of that potential problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Harold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Norris, also, do we have any data, and maybe this would be something for Director Budd with the trust, do we have any data of how much of those acreage were cheatgrass covered acreage? Because I know obviously that's gasoline for a forest fire or for a wildland fire. So do we have any idea also maybe some of those runaways, how much of that was getting into cheatgrass and running in that?
Forrester Norris.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I do not want to speak on behalf of Director Budd. I know they are working on that. I know they are going to start tracking that. There is some work being done to provide exactly that for you. I do not have that on hand for you at this time. Okay.
And go ahead, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Forrester Norris, I'm thinking back to in Cheyenne this spring. And one of the things that you said that I'm going to ask you to just kind of reiterate or touch on again, it's kind of twofold. What happens when a fire starts, for example, on Camp Guernsey, and then jumps the line and moves on to other ownership? And it seems to me that you mentioned that in a case similar to that, there was sometimes some hesitancy on the part of people on the ground to take a particular action because of the responsibility for paying for it down the road. Would you care to pontificate on that for me?
Forster Norris, please.
Right, Mr. Chairman, Representative. So if there is a fire that occurs on Camp Guernsey, Wyoming military lands, and it gets beyond their capacity, as you heard, they do have firefighters there, and we do coordinate. We, just so you're aware, this spring, Wyoming State Forestry and Camp Guernsey did a dozer class out there. There's 15 miles of dozer line to try and keep things in place. So we are working hard on mitigation and training at the same time out there. With that, though, we would have a response, and we will have a responsibility to put that fire out. And as you heard right now, there would be a workaround. The Wyoming military lands are not part of the emergency fire suppression account. It's for state trust lands. We're going to talk about that much later today. With that, we would be coordinating with the governor and the funding stream he has, and coordinating through a revolving account to mitigate those costs. On those cost shares. But as you heard, when a fire starts in a jurisdiction, it'll be that jurisdictional's responsibility to take care of all of those fire costs and logistics, whether it's on Wyoming military lands or state trust lands.
Follow up, go ahead, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. And then wanted to go back to, you had indicated that there may be some hesitancy to take some action, if you would comment on that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative, and we are going to get into pretty good depth on this with you all as well. In the emergency fire suppression account statute, I got to get my statute out here. There is language in that statute that basically, and I'm probably going to paraphrase this terribly. Yes, thank you. Insufficient funds. So in the rules match the statute that if the state forester determines the EFSA may be insufficient to make reimbursements for full costs of suppression and mop-up of qualifying occurring fires, or which may occur during the fire year, he may delay reimbursement until the close of the calendar year, at which time reimbursements will be prorated on EFSA. So you had a fire specifically in your county, specifically associated with your fire districts in Sheridan County, and we were out of money, obligated money. And so that fire district is going to be ordering resources for that elk fire, not knowing if they're going to be stuck with that bill or not. And that's how this is set up right now. So that's what that hesitancy is about, is will we have that money or not? How are we going to pay for this?
And Forster Norris, I believe there was some legislation that Ms. Martineau had in her package that pointed out if the military department does start a fire, that they are financially responsible for
Correct.
taking care of that on public and private land outside of their land.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Please proceed.
All right. So our biggest and most important accomplishment last year, not a single life was lost. We didn't lose a civilian life. We didn't lose a firefighter life. All fires eventually go out. They do. That's what we tell ourselves. That's what I kept telling myself. Nothing is worth protecting more than human life. And I can't say enough about the importance of our coordination between the local, state, and federal wildfire resources. It is key to our success here in Wyoming, and we depend on each other, because not one agency, not one fire district can take care of all of it ourselves, and fire is everyone's responsibility. And that's what I want you to walk away with today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, good morning. So I just want to make sure I got this now, that last year we had an anomaly, much larger fire year than we had due to conditions that were just right for that. Whether it was on federal land, state land, military land, it was just the condition across the board. Some Some prepare better than others, maybe, maybe not. We'll get into some of those things, nuances later. But the bottom line, what I just got from your testimony was that it's the overarching attitude, for want of a better term, that in your department, you will put out the fire and then we go out. And the reason why we have all these different accounts and all these different funding mechanisms and waiting times for reimbursement between agencies, federal government, local government, state government, and everyone else is the state responds to a fire. All the jurisdictions respond to a fire. Then afterwards, we sit down and say, okay, whose money, which pot can this go for? And that's whether it's a grant request, whether it's money from a federal grant, federal dollars coming through Homeland Security or coming through the military department or coming through state agencies, whether it's coming from county government, the 23 counties that put into it. But then all that gets dispersed out and kind of parsed out afterwards. And so, as you said, the main goal, which you achieved, was no loss of life, as minimal private property damage as possible, homes, structures. And that's kind of the pecking order and the triage that you go through while you're in that moment. That'd be a fair characterization of what I just heard.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly what happens on each and every single fire. We go immediately to who are we saving? Who do we need to save now? Because every community is different. You look at a community like Hartville, we need to evacuate that community quicker than some of our other communities because of the age, the condition of and the accessibility of some of those places, right? So how are we going to save those lives? Then we go into how are we going to save their homes? How are we going to save that corral? How are we going to save the livestock? And what happened multiple times last summer is we had multiple fires going and we had to day and night tell them we had nothing for them, because it had to go to the fire that had the people. It had to go to the fire that had the houses. And that's where we had to put the resources at that time. So that's how we make all of our decisions. Now, interesting enough, on some of these fires, there's certain values and we have to, as a group, agree to what is the highest value at risk. Now, you're going to have the human life and you're going to have the homes. But in places like Sheridan County, when you have one water source, for the entire county, for that entire community threatened, that becomes one of our top priorities to protect. And so those are the type of things that we are agreeing to as multiple agencies, multiple fire districts, all at the same time while these fires are going. And you're absolutely right. We are all covering different costs. So some of these fires were like, BLM, can you cover this? Get the food, state, you're going to cover these things, you're going to cover that. And so we're still bringing in all these costs post-fire. And that's the other challenging part. It's not just one agency that's paying for all these bills.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So once again, then so when an incident occurs, we don't pull out the paperwork first and say, well, you have no money in your account, so we're going to stand down. You put out the fire, then we go back and take a look. While that may be true at the time, then we go back and then we take a look at everything. And what we're going to be doing the rest of the day is assessing how that all went as far as we know up to this point. How can we do it better? How can we work on it? And that'll be the gist of the rest of the day. But suffice it to say now and in the future, we have a fire, we take care of the fire. And then we go back and say, oh, okay, where do we look? Where do we look for it? And sometimes in the moment, would it be, if I can follow up to that, Mr. Chairman, let's say, for example, you've got equipment, manpower on the ground, then a fire occurs in a closer area. It might be more prudent, cost effective at that time to deploy those people, move them there instead of break them down and mobilize someone else over here. And so those decisions also get made in the moment.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, absolutely. They are getting made constantly at a regional, state, and local level with all of our different resources and everything we have. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Forrester Norris, one of the criticisms we heard in this county was when we get down to that third and fourth tier of priorities and, homeowners and ranchers, would see resources parked for whatever reason. Maybe they're trying to keep traffic out of an area, or they had some other purpose, but we weren't aggressively going after a new fire, that type of thing. And I think there was testimony in this community that they didn't want to start something that they couldn't finish and then end up possibly trapped and put other lives in danger. So, you know, as we're talking about the mindset based on funding, if there's any evidence that any fire department or resources slowed down in their effort based on a concern for funding, if we could have testimony to that effect, it would be helpful, just so we understand, is there a need to change the model of how we fund so that we can address those mindsets? I'm not sure that there was any such incident, but if there was, we'd sure like to know as a committee so we can address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am going to defer those type of things. We have two very well-versed county representatives here. But before I pass the torch to them, I want to just take a look. We rehanded out the January 2025. Many of you saw this survey results. And to your point a little bit, we're putting out these fires, but just because the fires got put out, there is no lack of work post-fire. So I want to make sure I think that's where Senator Guru was going. So last November, State Forestry conducted a survey from all 23 fire wardens and Wyoming federal fire leadership, asking for input about how we manage wildfire together, the needs from State Forestry, as well as identified gaps. And as I said, I believe we went through this in the past, but I want to just kind of reframe our mind through the day. 1/3 of our fire wardens in Wyoming are full paid, 1/3 are part-time paid, and 1/3 are part-time volunteer fire wardens. More than 70% of your fire wardens hold more than one position. Your top resources in your counties that they provide on wildland fire is volunteer firefighters, engines, and tenders. And those tenders are very important. Top 3 resources federal partners provide are their engines, they're the dispatchers. We have multiple interagency dispatch centers that we rely very heavily on. We have one in Teton, one in Cody, one in Casper, and one is in Rapid City in the Great Plains that covers the Black Hills. And as well as their firefighters. So State Forestry asks counties and federal agencies, of the resources we provide, and that's on page 2, on that top table, what are the most important? And the top 3 was aviation, financial support, and administration agency administrators came out on top. So as for expectations and needs of State Forestry, the top comments included full-time staffed engines, more finance staff, more aviation staff, hand crews, fire overhead leadership, training, and financial ability to pre-position resources to support initial attack fires. The statewide gaps identified were fuels mitigation, training, a reliance on federal resources to supplement the state's lack of capacity, and aviation. So since the survey, the state legislature, specifically Joint Appropriations, doubled State Forestry's aviation program, including seasonal fire staff associated with the aviation program. So that is lockstep with the results of what came out of the statewide survey. The other item, sorry.
I would just add also that on financial support, this body and both of the chambers in the legislature did refill all of those contingency accounts and also increased the governor's borrowing authority from the LUSRA account. So I think all parties worked hard to make sure that we're prepared for this summer. Thank you.
Thank you. Great point. And absolutely that it's 1 and 2 were very, very critical and are going to be critical moving into this fire season. The other item State Forestry has moved forward on, in coordination with the counties and the governor's office, is updating the emergency fire suppression account rules. So at the November 2025 Rural Fire meeting, the Rural Fire Association voted to move forward on updating the EFSA rules, as the rules had not been changed for 20 years. Over the last several months, the federal agencies that we depend on for wildland fire suppression support have been going through some pretty big reductions and transitions. This has led to the implementation of an emergency fire suppression account rule to utilize the account when necessary to pre-position resources within the state's needs in places of areas of high risk in fire weather conditions. This would allow us to bring in additional suppression resources to areas that may need robust initial attack support, focus on getting wildfires out as quickly as possible, as what was basically needed in this area in August last year, right? So we want to use however we can the resources we have available, whether they're local or other state resources. And we're just waiting on final approval from Management Council to proceed with those emergency rules. At the same time, we're going to move forward and I'm hoping as of today, should have general rule changes out for public comment. The proposed EFSA rule changes are to modernize the rules to reflect current wildfire suppression management standards. The rules will enhance wildfire preparedness through the pre-positioning resources, clarifies request and notification procedures, improves multi-jurisdictional coordination, updates financial terms and reimbursement standards, and it aligns the rules with our interagency agreements that govern our wildfire suppression efforts across Wyoming and neighboring jurisdictions. These new updates are designed to ensure fairness, accountability, and operational effectiveness while maintaining the EFSA as a vital tool to the emergency fire suppression support. Because they're going to go through the regular rule process, they will not be implemented this fire season, hence the desire to have the emergency rule for the pre-positioning this year. I am going to stop here and pass it on to Chief Cooper, if that's okay, unless you have more questions.
That is perfectly fine. Go ahead, Senator Driscoll.
Thank you. Gonna wander around one second. All right. Thank you. First off, thank all of you very much. You know, it's pretty impressive when you look at the fire. I'm looking at the local guys and you, and having lived through it all for half my life, it's incredible to me the amount of coordination you have. And that's kind of leads into my first question, is to walk us through kind of the first responders, because we're talking everything on a higher level, at least in our area, and I think Campbell County as well. Most of them, it's our local guys that all come. The process, how that goes and how they're recorded and how they make calls to move the fire up the chain. Not money wise, but how those calls are made, who calls for the additional resources when you need a helicopter. Is that your local guy? I know these answers, but I think everybody needs to understand how they step through them all to actually get them to respond. And then what moves into state control on a fire and federal control, who makes those calls, and when do they start triggering payments? Because obviously the local level, nothing happens. You know, our county pays for the gas. Thank you, Campbell County. Crook County's got a lot of trucks that have come out of your counties. Same with the state and the feds. Like I said, it really makes a difference. But kind of wanted to walk through that into where it all falls. Maybe once again, a little talking about the retirement account for the volunteer firefighters. I know it's a big deal, and do we need to look at updating that and taking care of it? I don't know if everybody realizes if you're a volunteer, you get your card, you qualify for state retirement, and it's a big deal for a bunch of ranchers. I mean, it literally in our area, a bunch of those guys, it's the only retirement they get, and they fight fire partially because of it. And it's, I for one am very thankful. I don't end up, other than standing around at the fire most of the time, I'm not good enough at doing it, but you know, it's amazing. We just had a fire day for yesterday at home, and you know, the community comes. Last, kind of going through a couple more, stability of federal government payments, going forward. How do we kind of look at anticipating what might go up or down with federal resources, up and down, and payment timing and how it goes? I know the state's helped, at least in our county, a bunch with doing paperwork, and federal paperwork's complicated. But lag times get important to counties that are broke. And should the state be looking at maybe filling in some of that in between waiting on money coming? Because on particularly poorer counties, sometimes that lag, and then we haven't had a house draw fire. But you get one of those, you get into Crook County, Weston County, Hot Springs type deal, they may have a hard time in their county budget, and should we be looking into that? So thank you. I kind of wandered around, but it's nice to go, and I really thank you for the work you guys have done with your air stuff and your hot shot crews that come out of the prison camps. You know, a few years ago, they were talking about getting rid of them, and I had a meltdown because the prison camp out of Weston County's had major impacts on fires in our area, and I'm highly supportive of it. If you need more resources to support that, I'd be more than happy to help or listen to what we need to be doing. Thank you.
Forster North.
All right. We are going to cover some of this in presentation. I call this my next presentation number 2. But I'm going to have Shad and JR kind of walk through maybe when the fire goes out. And I just want to make you aware, sir, you have the first EFSA fire in Crook County this year. So that just occurred. So Crook County had a fire in private land. It was in a canyon. It was difficult to get to, and they didn't have the capacity in this fire in complexities, maybe a type 4. They needed hand crew. Smoke busters, we were able to show up with a short, it's on the weekend. We only have so much staffing, so they had a smaller group show up with the smoke busters, and they needed another hand crew. And so we had to find a federal hand crew. When they put in the order to interagency dispatch, the closest one was in Coeur d'Alene. So we then, State Forestry, through our duty officer, coordinated with the regional GACs and said, hey, we want to pull this one on Prepo that's sitting in Laramie, and had to pull the one on Prepo in Laramie of the federal ones that they were holding for the Front Range of Colorado and the Wyoming Medbo, and sent it up for a day or two. But they just needed a day or two of a hand crew, and now we're in the EFSA. So that, and they're paying a floor cost. They're going to have to deal, for the whole thing, because we don't have additional crew. They don't have the capacity. That just gives you an idea of some of the challenges we're having to work through. Is resources aren't just sitting here in Wyoming. They have to come here.
Follow up, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that fire actually is about a half mile from my house and about 200 yards off my ranch. And I watched the federal trucks coming out this morning, and I was curious, but because generally they don't respond. It was a private fire. That helps a lot, because that was a big deal. You couldn't hardly walk into that fire. I mean, you could look out the window of my house and look at it. And it was one of those ones that if the wind came up, I was toying whether you called for a helicopter on it, because those guys were having a hard time on the ground with it. So I appreciate that. I had no clue that you went that fast to that level. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And the helicopter was out chasing another fire in the Laramies at that time. So, and our medium isn't on yet. So I'm going to pass it on. Let the counties explain what happens when a fire happens, and kind of walk you through that. And also talk about the retirement account. The account, the bill, the invoicing of the counties, and the leg of federal payouts. That I can hit on with the 537. That's the fire revolving account that we have through State Forestry. I had Sheila do a whole write-up for me on this account, and I know Kevin's here too. So that account in itself was set up, and I believe it started in 2018. And the whole purpose of that revolving account is the counties that do go out in state or out of state on these federal fires, they bill through the state, and the state will reimburse them, and then then we go bill through a package deal to those federal agencies for a quicker response. So the county should be getting their payments then in 45 to 60 days, right, from the time they go out. So, for example, Fremont County goes out to BIA fires frequently. That billing comes to us. We audit it, go through it, look up against our mobilization guide. We reimburse Fremont County, and then we go and get that bill paid for in a package deal. We consolidate all of them from across the state. That program since 2018 has increased substantially. The counties have grown, they've invested in their equipment. We, I think, did close to just in state, because the state was so busy, had close to 3 million in billing alone last year, let alone now they're going out to Kansas they went to California and the fires over there. They went down to Texas. Some of them responded to the hurricanes. That account is seeing a substantial amount of movement because of the work that is being done. But because state forestry doesn't have a bunch of capacity going out to out of state, it's the counties that are going out and responding and showing the help and building that that coordination between the other states that come into Wyoming and help us. I'm going to let you guys kind of cover the rest of it. To Ogden's question.
Thank you, Forester Norris. And before we get to you, Chief Cooper, I just want to announce to everybody in the room that we're going to target 30 minutes from now to go to public comment. So if you're wanting to comment, we're going to get about 15 minutes before our first break. There'll be another episode of this, as the Forester mentioned. She's going to have presentation number 2. I believe the chiefs will be involved with that as well, and then we'll have more public comment later this morning. So with that, we'll proceed. Chief Cooper.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. There's a lot of questions that Senator Driscoll had kind of addressed there. I'm going to try to answer a few of them, but I'll ask for some help from Chief Fox to help me with some of that as well. I guess I'm going to start with the coordination piece first of all, and just kind of talk about how we coordinate to respond together. I think that's really important to understand. As I mentioned during the introduction, I serve as the president of the Wyoming Fire Advisory Board. And what that means is our body is the executive board of the Wyoming Rural Fire Association. And it's important to understand that body represents all 23 counties. The county fire wardens in each of those 23 counties share resources with each other. When in Sublette County, if Teton County has a fire and they need some help, they want to be able to give me a call and I can send an engine up to help them out. Well, there's a protocol, there's a process to make sure that I send them the right engine with the right people. And how long are they going to be out of my county? And when can I expect to get them back? All those kind of questions are necessary. And so what our body does, what the Wyoming Rural Fire Association does, is get together every year and talk about those agreements, those interagency mutual aid agreements, the cooperative agreements that are necessary to share those resources. And that's really what our body primarily does. We focus on coordination, collaboration, partnership, and networking between the local agencies, the county to county and the city to the county, but also with the state agencies. We work during this fire season. It's almost daily that I have a conversation with the state forester about the availability of resources or the need to share resources, but also with our federal agencies as well. And specifically in Sublette County, we have a tremendous amount of Forest Service and BLM jurisdiction, and we work shoulder to shoulder with them when we have a fire. And it's incredibly important and complicated to make sure that when we have a fire, that all of our firefighters have a common operating picture when they respond. We can use an incident action plan and hand it out to somebody, and they know exactly what they're expected to do. They have the side rails and understanding that their job is to hold the fire, north of this line, or order a single engine air tanker to drop retardant or whatever it is. That coordination piece takes a tremendous amount of effort, and that's what our body does, the Wyoming Rural Fire Association. our bodies, we're actually celebrating 65 years. This year is our 65th anniversary. It's all we do is coordinate. And State Forester Norris had mentioned last year during our annual meeting, we meet every year in December, first week of December every year. Last year during our annual meeting, one of the things we try to do is look back at the previous year and say what happened last year, what are the lessons learned, where do we have hiccups, and how are we going to smooth those bumps out for next year to make it better. And as you know, last year was certainly a historic year, and we had a lot of conversation about where we had problems last year and where we were concerned about this year. And as a result of the rural fire meeting last year, there were several recommendations that were made from our body to go and meet with the state legislature and develop what eventually became Senate File 152, which we presented to you, and the recommendation to create a task force to talk about how to improve the efficiencies, which is eventually what evolved into us being here today to have exactly the conversation we're having. So thank you very much for your support in getting to this point. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I wanted to kind of explain the coordination piece, which I think addresses Senator Driscoll's question about is how do we coordinate to respond to these fires? And that coordination is an ongoing, evolving process of all the agreements and everything that's necessary. But even before we get to the coordination piece, he also asked about how do we actually, how does the fire escalate? And I think it's worth a minute of description to talk about. And I think during earlier testimony, we addressed that 99% of the time when we have a fire, it's handled at the local level. And I'll just use Sublette County as an example, but really the majority of the time we have a small wildland fire. It's an agriculture burn, and maybe some farmers burning the ditches off or something like that, and it gets away a little bit of additional wind. And 99% of the time, somebody will call 911. Our fire department will respond, and we put it out. And it's a pretty simple process. That's part of my budget, my budget, and we make sure that our firefighters have the training, the tools, the equipment, everything they need to be successful in putting that out. And then a few times it'll be more than just an acre or two. Sometimes it'll be a little larger. Sometimes it'll be in the sage or even in the timber. Sometimes it'll cross jurisdictional boundaries and maybe not cross the line, but even threaten to cross the line. And then that's when we start standing up what we call the agency administrators group. And all of this is addressed in our annual agreements. But as part of that process, if I expect it to be within 1 mile of a jurisdictional line, I know from our preseason agreements that I need to call that jurisdictional entity and say, we have a fire established, it's heading towards you. I want to make sure that you're aware that it's coming. And these are the additional resources that I need. And I don't know every fire is going to be different, but sometimes it might be a helicopter or a hand crew or an engine or whatever that might be. And then, so part of that agency administrators group is we confer about, the current fire conditions, about the threat, about what direction it's going and what we anticipate or expect it to do. And then we start trying to forecast the decision. We don't ever want to be reactive in our decision making. We want to try to be proactive and start thinking, in advance of how are we going to order the necessary resources. And then again, the vast majority of the time, we're able to capture those fires, contain them within the first operational period. Usually that means the first day of the assignment. And really 99% of the time, we're very, very successful in that. But once in a while, due to the complexity of, and Chairman Barry, you asked a question earlier about, why was last year such an impactful year. Well, it's due to the complexity of fuel, weather, and topography, and the interaction of those three factors. So how dry is it? Are we in the middle of a drought? What type of fuel? Is it in grass, sage, or timber? Is it a high wind event? Fuel, weather, and topography. Is it burning up the hill or down the hill? Those three factors combined will determine, how often a fire gets away from us or requires additional response for multiple operational periods. And so if we anticipate that a fire is going to do that, we stand up the agency administrators group and start talking about ordering resources, ordering incident management teams, ordering some of the large costly equipment. The aircraft is usually the biggest single cost, the large air tankers and the very large air tankers that drop tens of thousands of gallons of retardant. That's an extremely expensive proposition. And when we make those large decisions, we try to make sure that we're conferring with our other agency administrators, and everybody's in agreement that we're gonna cover those costs, and we're gonna do the right thing to protect lives and save property and prioritize, you know, the protection of infrastructure. And then once the fire does go past what we call initial attack into the extended multiple operational periods, then we try to actually meet and prioritize what's most important, because what might be most important for me is maybe you know, protecting lives and property first and foremost, but maybe protecting agriculture. Maybe I understand the impact to the grazing allotment is going to be absolutely critical to the ranchers that I'm representing. And so when I have a conversation with our Forest Service or BLM, we all try to sit down as soon as possible and talk about the prioritization of what might be conflicting priorities, and we deconflict those priorities, and we all come to an agreement on, okay, we're going to focus on these objectives first and foremost, and then those objectives, and that's kind of the process we use. And then in addition to that, we also start talking about very early in the process how we're going to pay for the fire. And depending on the jurisdictions that are involved, and there's different ways we can do the payment process. In Sublette County, I've got a tremendous amount of federal property surrounding the private property, and so we use this every year. We've actually got a large fire right now in Sublette County, but we meet with our federal partners, and we start talking about, hey, can everybody agree that the percent of acres will be how we bill each other? So if there's 1,000-acre fire and 800 of those acres are on the Forest Service and 200 of those acres are on private, we'll divide that up 80-20 or whatever the math works out to be. That's one common way that we agree to pay for those fires. There's other ways to do it. There's a percent of effort. If all of the money was spent on protecting one critical value, maybe that value might warrant additional cost from whoever was responsible for that value. That's another way to do it. It's much more complicated. We try to avoid doing that, but that's an example of the kind of conversations and some of the complexities on how we pay for fires that comes up during those conversations.
Chief Cooper, these items you're discussing are all things that are discussed as you're preparing to engage the fire and as you're fighting the fire. How much of this type of decision-making can be included in your AOPs, your annual operating plans between counties and between the state and the county, just as a prepared, and how often do you update those typically with your surrounding counties so that you can, if you do, address some of those priorities?
Thank you, Chairman. That's a great question. The answer is we update the annual operating plan. We call them sub-geographic meetings every year. And we generally do it every March, get all of our local, state, and federal partners together in the same room, review the problems from the previous year, and talk about how to improve the upcoming year. And then we all go to our elected officials and obtain necessary signatures to move into the upcoming year and improve whatever efficiencies we need to make from the lessons learned from the previous year.
Do those plans include some of these priorities, or is that something you just address fire by fire?
We do try to address the priorities. Yes, we've identified critical watersheds and ordering resources to address those things. So we try to hit the high level stuff. Every fire is going to be unique though, and we're not going to be able to pre-plan every single value at risk. So we try to address that as well at the time of the fire.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you very much. So what I was trying to hit on was the coordination piece. That was really where I wanted to focus on. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the coordination that was necessary to get in front of you today. I think that it's important to understand is that, during that rural fire meeting in every December, last year, we looked back at the 2024 season, and we said that we wanted to create what eventually became Senate File 152. And thank you very much for your support to move forward with that. That was a critical piece of legislation that was necessary to help us to fight fire this year. But the other thing we try to talk about is how do we improve efficiencies? And last year, one of the things we talked about was some of the difficulties we have with using the existing emergency fire suppression account. And so, we get all the county fire wardens in the room, and some of the recommendations that come from that meeting was to address the emergency fire suppression account. And State Forester Norris had mentioned some of the things like, specifically like pre-positioning. The need to pre-position firefighting resources based on drought or weather or predicted forecasts and some of the predicted services. So that's one of the recommendations that came out of the rural fire meeting and came out as a result of working with the Wyoming Fire Service to prepare to be in front of you today. I want to kind of emphasize that it's certainly not a knee-jerk reaction. We as the Wyoming Fire Service are meeting regularly. We have quarterly meetings with the Fire Chiefs Association. We have annual meetings with the Rural Fire Association. We have we just had a meeting we did a statewide online survey in March, asking for input from all the fire districts and all the fire wardens and all the fire departments, asking about what's most important. What do we want to bring to our state legislature to ask for help from? And then we actually had an in-person meeting in Casper where we brought everybody together and asked everybody for further, a face-to-face meeting to really solidify the recommendations that we're going to present to you later today. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it's by no means reactionary. We're trying very, very hard to be proactive and make decisions that are in the best interest of protecting lives and property, but doing it in a fiscally responsible way. And those are the recommendations that we're going to make to you, and we'll get to that very soon. But the summary that I'm getting to is it's the recommendations we're making to you today have been well thought out, well designed, and we're hopeful that we can work with our legislature and you as a joint appropriations committee to address these needs and improve efficiencies in the future. With that, I think JR's got quite a bit of information that also answers some of the questions that Senator Driscoll had asked.
Any questions from the committee for Chief Cooper? Okay, let's get to you, Chief Fox. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important to kind of go back to 2024. I think that's the catalyst for this meeting, and it kind of sets the stage for later on this afternoon. And Kelly did a great job talking a lot about that, but maybe I can provide a bit of a local perspective. And although this is my perspective, I know it's probably a lot of these points are shared by adjoining fire wardens, fire chiefs that lived 2024 Northeast Wyoming as well. I know there's other parts of the state that had significant fire activity, but in 2024, Campbell County had 150 wildland fires. That's not out of the ordinary. We've had many more than that in previous years, but of those 150 fires, we burned 119,000 acres of state and private land. 6 EFSA fires burned 109,000 acres. So essentially 10,000 acres on initial attack, 109,000 acres for those large, complex EFSA fires, as Chief Cooper alluded to, that topography, the fuels, the weather, that plays a significant, those are significant factors for those large fires. August 21st, we actually started our day with mutual aid to Johnson County. They had a fire that they were tied up on house draw. It had already started. So we went into Johnson County about 10 miles with the BLM and started helping them suppress a fire from the previous day. That afternoon, Northeast Wyoming definitely had the sheriff fire, the Remington fire in Sheridan County, burned into Montana. House draw started south of Buffalo towards KC, burned north, jumped all 4 lanes in the median of I-90. And then in the evening, early evening, the Constitution fire, which is north of Gillette, about 10 miles, and the Flat Rock fire about 10 miles west. As Forester Norris indicated, about 450,000 acres from those fires. So significant. Mutual aid was non-existent. We rely on our partners. We rely on our joining counties. We rely on the Forest Service, the BLM. There was nothing to be had. We had counties calling my organization for help. We couldn't provide any help. everybody was on an island, if you will. Aviation, a lot of talk about aviation more today. Aviation was eventually grounded due to the strong winds. You know, helicopters, air tankers can't fly in 50, 60 mile an hour winds. Damage was very minimal to primary and secondary structures, so I think that is a bit of a success. As Kelly alluded to, the loss of life or no loss of life on those fires. So what did we learn? Training is important. It's vital. State Forestry does provide some excellent wildland fire training to fire departments, fire districts around the state. Public information. My organization learned a hard lesson that night. We typically issue a press release every morning at 7 o'clock. We've done that for years. We learned the public demands information, on their cell phones immediately. When we issue evacuations, it's even more imperative. Our public information officer for our organization, it's a collateral duty like many things that we do. He was entrapped on the Constitution fire and unable to send out those press releases. So that was a hard lesson learned. Again, mutual aid is not always reliable on a regional scale. If we have thunderstorms tracking through multiple counties, those adjoining counties we rely on, to Chief Cooper's point, they're not available. They've got their own fires, they've got their own potential, and they're gonna keep those resources close to protect their areas. Wyoming is not staffed or equipped to handle multiple emerging fires. Your fire departments, your fire districts are staffed and equipped for initial attack. The first 24, 48, 72 hours of wildland fires, that's what they're designed around. They're not designed, they're not staffed to handle 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 acre fires. Weather is a factor, to Chairman Bear's point. Drought, wind, dry thunderstorms. To put it into perspective, in 2023, in Campbell County, I have 2 fire weather zones. We had 8 fire weather warnings or watches in 2023. In 2028, we had 28. So essentially every other day or every third day, we were in a fire weather watch or a fire weather warning for low relative humidity, high temperatures, high winds, dry thunderstorms. Any of those factors that the Weather Service deems could be a fire day. Another important consideration. So the Buffalo Complex, the Remington, House Draw, Constitutional Flat Rock, initiated on the 21st of August. In the next 2.5 days, my agency also responded to 49 other emergencies. So just because we have a wildfire burning, it doesn't mean that houses don't start on fire, cars don't wreck, somebody goes into cardiac arrest. Your fire departments, your fire districts still have services to provide, regardless of how busy you may be. The EFSA account, it's excellent. The vision in 1986 to create that account was exemplary. The rules that were created are very reactive. So it's great to pay the bills at the end of the fire and to cover those costs. But I think we should look at some opportunities to be proactive with that account. And I think the emergency rules for preposition is a step in the right direction with that. Relationships do matter. Some strong partnerships were developed and strengthened in 2024, county to county, with our state partners, our federal partners. And it's also important to understand the vital role that the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service plays at the county level. We talk daily with the BLM, the Forest Service fire staffs. They respond as the closest resource to private land fires, to state land fires. In my organization, we actually house the Forest Service engine from the grasslands in Wright, Wyoming. The BLM engines out of Buffalo respond automatically to our fires, regardless if we know the jurisdiction of the fire or not. And they are absolutely vital in Wyoming, and we definitely would not be as successful without them. So a couple of opportunities for my organization. This meeting is an opportunity for change, and I think I'm glad to be a part of that. Locally, we did create a public information group to get ahead of that public information issue. We've been working with Homeland Security. We met in, I believe, April. And statewide, we have decided to adopt the Ready, Set, Go evacuation process. Interestingly enough, on August 21st, our first evacuation in Campbell County was from the house draw fire. So it was initiated in Johnson County because the fear that this fire was coming into Campbell County. So that was our first evacuation. And we learned an important lesson on what does pre-evacuation mean? What does evacuation mean? And there's already a nationwide campaign with Ready, Set, Go that really is a little more intuitive to the end user for what that means. Fire-wise, defensible space. We've been hitting that hard as an organization. We have recently hired an individual as a wildland fuels mitigation specialist to liaison with landowners and to work on the mitigation side of wildland fire. Additional training of the public, we provided that. Some communications equipment, communications is something we're always trying to improve. And 2 years ago, we applied for a U.S. Forest Service grant that came through state forestry for a wildfire protection plan. Those don't happen quickly, but we did receive funding for that. And we'll talk more about mitigation in that plan specifically later on. And of course, as Forester Norris mentioned, the aviation resources, that's going to help local jurisdictions out tremendously. Success, finally, as I kind of wrap it up, it's important to relay that your Wyoming Fire Service was successful in 2024. My organization had a 96% success rate on containing all wildland fires in the first operational period. While we do hear about the bigger fires, the destructive fires, and those are very appropriate, we were 96% successful keeping those fires contained in that first operational period. And the state success rate is almost mirrors my organization. So in closing, your Wyoming Fire Service is committed, and the interagency relationships, they're as strong as I've seen in the 30 years I've been involved in the fire service in the state of Wyoming.
Thank you, Chief Fox, and I will reiterate that. Excellent results up against a real wall as far as the difficulties last year. Representative Harrells.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you guys. I had the privilege actually of going through my red card training 2 weekends ago because I thought, you know what, I probably ought to get some of these terms under my belt if we're going to play this game. And I had an old lead man from the power plant that's been bugging me to be a firefighter since I was 21. So here we are. You guys last year were up against an impossible situation. That's the reality. I think you said it well when you're like, hey, we were calling everyone hoping for help. And the reality is there was no one else because they were putting out fires of their own, right? No pun intended. One of the things that I think, and just kind of wanted to get your input on this, public knowledge and perception is a huge battle we're fighting, I feel. It was really interesting. I talked to a number of people in Platte County last year and said, how many fires do you think we had in Platte County last year? And they were like 3 to 4. And I'm like, that's the problem. That's one of our big problems because, well, 3 to 4, because those were the ones that left enough smoke the next day for them to know they were still there, right? And as we're looking at those fire numbers, the reality, and you're pulling the number up, what is it right now?
It's 56.
56 fires.
You burned 56, 57 because you had a federal fire for 32,746 acres.
Exactly. But the perception of the public is firefighting, they don't care about it until they're getting evacuated. They don't care about it until 4th of July weekend's ruined because it's too much smoke at the lake. I mean, and I think so can we talk a little bit about maybe what that aspect of it? And because as I've been looking at it and I've been getting more knowledgeable myself, I'm realizing that we've got a huge amount of volunteers that are amazing, that are dedicating their entire summer last year to this battle, right? And the public knowledge of it is kind of like, well, you didn't get that fire out already? Mm-hmm. When you're talking 2,000 fires that burned and 25 that went to that level, like I think there needs to be that public knowledge. And one other statement I do want to make as well, coming from that Sawmill Canyon fire that we had on the range, and kind of sadly enough, maybe not the best management of that to today. Cam Guernsey's done amazing. Like there's been huge changes, and that's a huge testimony to Aaron Clark and his team there in Platte County that said, "Hey, we can't continue to fight fires this way. Let's become a team on this." And now we're just seeing a really good relationship for that. So just that's a testimony of the state. That's a testimony to our Cam Guernsey crews and our locals. But so can we talk a little bit about maybe that public knowledge concept and how do we get the public into a position in place where they understand the battle and also understand that mitigation aspect around their places, and kind of that public educational piece, I think, is going to be key as we move forward with this conversation.
If either of the chiefs want to respond to that, we're going to keep it brief, and if we need to extend that response to the next session, we can do that. I want to get started in just a couple of minutes with public comment.
Mr. Chair, Representative Harrelson, I think that was a lesson we learned early on. And I think that's evident in our looking at that mitigation, that the fuels mitigation specialist that we have hired. He is going to have collateral duty during the fire season. So, pre-season, working with landowners, fire-wise, hardening the ranches, hardening the landowners, primary residence. But during fire season, we envision that position to be that liaison with the landowners. To Chairman Bear's point, why is there a truck, on this road or up on this ridge top? Well, they're a lookout. We've got folks that are in a dangerous spot, so we need them to be up there. Or they're on this road because this is the only feature we have for 15 miles, and they've got 10 miles of road to cover. We need to make sure nothing spots across this road. And if it does, we need somebody to see it quickly and get some resources headed this way. The public information piece is something that we changed internally. Our collateral duty PIO is now that he's not going to be out operational much during the fire season. He is going to be updating Facebook and working with local press to make sure that the public does understand what is going on. I know I have talked to the forester about a statewide. Obviously there'll probably be collateral duties but I do think the state does that would benefit communities that maybe don't have that PIO position, that there is some opportunities to get that message out to the public as well.
Okay, before I get to you, Representative, I just want to see who in the audience is interested in this first round of public comment. We are going to have another round later on. Because if there is none here, how about online? Do we have anyone online? If there's time, I may just have you stay here and continue answering questions for the committee.
If there is anyone online who wish to make public comment, please raise your hand for us so we can identify you. Thank you.
While we're waiting on that, if we could go ahead and ask your question, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was mentioned earlier that all fires go out eventually, which immediately made me think of these coal seam fires. Eventually might be a while. So Warden Fox, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a project to map these and to track those. Could you give us an update on that? And also, in your estimation, do these hot spots, so to speak, represent a threat?
Chief Fox, go ahead and respond.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, a quick update on the mapping. So with the FMAG fire specifically in Johnson and Sheridan counties, there is mitigation money that comes behind those to try to mitigate the disaster. Campbell County was part of the disaster declaration. So Campbell, Johnson, Sheridan County, we have entered into an agreement, and we are pursuing a grant to map affected areas, all three counties. So Campbell County would be essentially everything north of I-90, using some aircraft to map and to identify, because we know historically we've had coal seam fires, quite a few. Just on BLM land in northern Campbell County, there's over 200 that we have mapped and we know about. I would speculate there's hundreds more we don't know about. And a bit of the catalyst for the mapping mission was the large footprint from that Buffalo complex. So in my county, essentially another 80,000 acres, one of the major causes of coal seam fires is wildland fire burning through shallow coal seam depressions that ignite those seams, and then they become a much bigger problem. So we're waiting to hear from the from FEMA on if we are successful in that mapping grant application. To the second part of your question, most assuredly we have wildland fire starts every year in all three counties, I would speculate, but I know for sure in Campbell County we have coal seam that do ignite wildland fires every year. To Chief Cooper's point, topography does matter. These coal seams typically are not on a nice flat pasture. They're typically in broken country. It's oftentimes in the BLM land that's not really grazed often, and access is an issue, suppression is an issue. So they do cause quite a bit of damage when they do get started, because typically they don't usually start until the winds hit about 30, 40 miles an hour when those fuels get cured out. So typically it's an August event. It's a high wind event, and that's typically when we see those coal seam starts, wildland fires.
Right. Do we have anyone online? Okay.
I do want to, Mr. Chairman, answer one of your questions that you had actually asked Elizabeth about the EFSA and the benefits, if there's ever been the counties that have or have not benefited. I had my financial person just double check. Every county that participates in the EFSA, except for Sweetwater, who just joined, I think literally 2 years ago, has had an EFSA fire. And the majority of the counties, even in the last 5 years, Lincoln, Teton, they've all, Uinta. So this is utilized across the board, across Wyoming. It's just, they've all benefited it. Take your pick on the year. And I would leave it up to either of these two to tell you the benefits of it to them. But Sweetwater County got real close. Last year and this year, they had a 30-acre fire, and we caught it within the mutual aids last week, and we didn't bill and didn't open up the EFSA on that one. The BLM was there, and they helped us put out that fire. So,
Thank you for that information. Can you elaborate, if you can, why Sweetwater delayed until just 2 years ago to join this effort?
Mr. Chairman, I am not sure on that. I wasn't state forester, and I'm not sure what the conversations were prior as to why Sweetwater, I know, is set up very differently. And I don't know if Shad, if you have any, I don't have any real information, so I'm sorry.
Gentlemen, well, first of all, are there any other questions right now for the forester? Okay, gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind just giving us your perspective of the benefits of being part of the EFSA.
I'll go first. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. This is actually really one of the crux points that we want to focus on. I think the EFSA is absolutely invaluable, and JR really hit the nail on the head. He says it was really forward thinking when they originally created the EFSA. I'll try to give an anecdote. If many there's differing numbers, but somewhere between 120 and 140 fire departments in the state of Wyoming. Many of those fire departments operate on a shoestring budget. They're volunteer fire departments. You know, they do pancake fundraisers often to afford to put fuel in the fire truck. And you know, when a large wildland fire occurs to the tunes of, you know, millions of dollars, it would be devastating for that local fire department or the community to be expected to try to pay the cost of that wildland fire. I mean, it's literally there. Recently, there was fire chiefs in the state of Wyoming that were calling me and saying, "Hey, I got a choice. Either I can insure the fire truck or I can put fuel in the fire truck. I can't do both this year." And to ask that fire department to come back and pay for you know, the cost of a large air tanker would be unreasonable and just unachievable. So the benefit of the EFSA is that it's the only way that we can afford to pay for these fires and be part of the process that our federal government expects right now, is that the local agencies participate in the cost share and participate in sharing those costs. And so the EFSA is really the only tool that we have statewide to allow us to cover those local costs that are necessary that we're faced with. Without that, we would bankrupt every fire department in the state when it was their time to have a big fire.
Thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I echo Chief Cooper's point of view. I think it's really viewed as an insurance policy for fire departments. I'm fortunate. I do have a well-funded fire department, but last year, conservatively, our wildland fires, our EFSA fires, somewhere near $10 million. My suppression budget, so that's unanticipated expenses, is somewhere around $90,000 to $100,000. So the 144 fires that we tackle, and they don't rise to the EFSA level, that's what that $100,000 takes care of. That's for meals, that's for damaged equipment, that's for hose that gets burned up, all the other things that happen on a wildland fire. Those organizations around the state, they're picking up the cost of those. It's these fires when we're in drought and difficult topography and a weather event that make these large fires. To Chief Cooper's point, I don't know if there is a county or for sure an organization in the state that could cover the cost of these fires on their own. It would simply bankrupt fire districts, fire departments, and potentially counties. So.
Thank you. Further questions from the committee? All right, we'll get an early start to our break here. We'll return in at 5 minutes after 10. We'll take a 15-minute break. Thank you very much. All right, legislators, let's find our seats. Joint Appropriations Committee. All right, Forster Norris, let's continue. Thank you.
All right. Good morning again, Chairman Bear, Chairman Salzar, members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Kelly Norris. I'm the Wyoming State Forester. Do you want to reintroduce yourself real quick?
J.R. Fox, Fire Warden for Campbell County, President of the Wyoming Fire Chiefs Association.
Shad Cooper, County Fire Warden for Sublette County and President of the Wyoming Fire Advisory Board.
Hey, I am going to kick us off. This is presentation number 2. So I want to start this presentation with a few key concepts when it comes to Wyoming and how we manage wildfire. First, wildfire needs to be seen as everyone's responsibility. Currently, Wyoming's fire suppression model is set up to manage fires as if fires stay in the jurisdictional boundaries. If a fire starts on private land, it is the fire protection district's responsibility. From the decisions to how to suppress, sources of ordering, the contracting, the logistics, the cost, they're all the fire district's responsibility. State forestry does not take over fires. The federal government does not over those fires. It not manage wildfires with a fully operational suppression and statewide response, rather as a supportive function. And wildfires, they tend not to stay in boundaries. We kind of figured that out last year. And when fires go beyond jurisdictional boundaries, local capacity and the local capacity of that fire district, state forestry has to get involved and starts coordinating and supporting those local fire districts' needs. We're pushing at that regional and national level for other state and federal resources to come and help support those local jurisdictions. As fires continue to increase in frequency and size, this model is becoming harder and harder to maintain. I have provided you a wildfire management handout that provides you a visual tool. It's supposed to be the concept of a 3-legged stool. Effective wildfire management is interlinked between 3 components: capacity, fuels mitigation, and funding. These 3 components are interrelated and dependent of each other. And one of these components is not available or equal in efforts, it should be expected that successfully managing for wildfires will inevitably lead to failure. Wyoming State Forestry Division's role is to coordinate and support wildfires in Wyoming. We provide a critical connection between that national, that regional, that state, and that local fire management. Wyoming State Forestry is a forestry division. Forestry is not in our title, as many other state forestry and fire agencies, and we are a division within the Office of State Lands and Investments. Wyoming State Forestry provides support to local, state, and federal fire entities by providing pass-through grant funding, training. We keep firefighter training records. We provide interagency coordination through the development and maintenance of the Wyoming Mobilization Guide and the Wyoming Red Car Manual. Wyoming State Forestry coordinates all regional and border state annual operating plan meetings. We implement the cooperative master agreement between Wyoming and the federal firefighting agencies. And we also provide oversight and conduct all state fire billing for both the emergency fire suppression account and the fire protection revolving account. The Wyoming State Forestry Fire Leadership also represents Wyoming on national fire committees, Western state committees, regional coordinating groups, and within our 4 interagency dispatch centers. I'd like to call your attention to the handout called Western States Comparison, and I think we're going to bring it up even visual for everyone. So we're going to go to the first table here, and it's going to say land protection acres in the million. There you go. Okay. What we did is, as part of the request was, what are the other state models? What are the other states doing? We took a hard look at the states that surround Wyoming. We did not include California, Oregon, and Washington because they would have blown these charts out of the water. So these are just more comparable Western states for us. Wyoming has approximately 33 million acres of state and private lands that state forestry is currently coordinating wildfire protection for. There's approximately 4 million acres of state administered lands within that 33. Wyoming ranks 4th in the total acres of lands to protect across Western states, and that's in that first graph. Okay, we're going to go down to the second graph. Roll on down. And that is the total personnel for forestry and fire agencies across the West. Wyoming is ranked last in the forestry and fire staffing with 50 full-time personnel. State forestry manages all forestry matters for state, private, and federal forests. We have grown in the federal forestry component, which is the 6 contract employees, which is our Good Neighbor Authority program. The state provides fire support through our aviation program, the inmate smoke buster program, and our fabrication shop in Cheyenne, which supports local fire districts for their fire equipment ordering. We utilize the federal access property program to acquire fire suppression equipment. We also rebuild military equipment that become fire engines that are used for local fire districts through that fabrication shop. We manage cooperative assistance federally funded forestry programs such as the Cooperative Fire, Volunteer Fire Assistance Grants, Forest Health, Stewardship, and Urban and Community Forestry. Wyoming State Forestry's field staff are foresters, which require 4-year forestry degrees. Wildfire is a collateral duty, yet there is an expectation and a need from the counties and federal agencies for agency administration and fire leadership within these positions. We have 2 district foresters with over 35 years of wildland fire experience, along with our shop foreman, who has an additional 30 years. These 3 positions will all be retiring in the next few years, leaving state forestry with over 100 years of fire operational experience loss, and no one coming in behind to replace it. Wyoming State Forestry puts an immense amount of time training our staff to be needed fire leadership personnel on the fire line in those leadership roles. Because our positions are forestry positions and not fire positions, our state staff do not have the similar benefits as federal firefighters they work alongside with on the fire line. The 35-year wildfire experienced state forestry district staff are likely making less than their much younger federal counterparts out on the fire line. Wyoming State Forestry consistently trains and loses our staff to federal fire agencies because we do not offer the same benefits in our positions of hazard pay, paid rest days off, or a firefighter retirement benefit package. And we have become Wyoming BLM's #1 agency to recruit from. When Wyoming State Forestry pulled staff off from the fire line for a break after weeks on the elk fire, unlike their federal colleagues who took actual paid days off, our staff went back to their normal job responsibilities. They had to go check on timber sales. They had to check on projects. They had to get back to everything else that they left behind, that they left their jobs for, to go and help on the fire. I'm going to direct you to page 2 in the top of the chart that's titled Fire Personnel in the handout. This chart showcases only firefighters within each state agency across the West. Again, out of the states listed, Wyoming is 4th in the amount of state and private land protection acres and ranks last in the number of firefighters. And these numbers are much higher than they used to be, thanks to your support with adding seasonal firefighters this spring, as well as 1 additional full-time. So Wyoming State Forestry considers 7 of our 50 positions to be firefighter related. So we have 2 heli-based managers, and we have 5 full-time crew positions associated with the smoke buster crew. Wyoming has 8 fire seasonals associated with our aviation program, and previously that was 4. So I just want to remind everybody of the fire season we had last year with over 550,000 acres of state and private lands burned, and the staff that we had. We had 1 heli-based manager, 4 seasonals, and we had a vacant crew supervisor position, so we had 4 crew supervisors. The 16 fire support positions are the rest of the state's fire staff. And I want to move over to the chart with the engines on it, which is the next page at the top of the next page, if you want to go to that. I want to make sure you understand what that's saying there. So moving over to that chart in the engine chart, it says the state has 4 engines. But we don't have any staff to fill these engines for initial attack response. These engines are only available if we have enough staff to fill the engines and at least 1 engine boss with qualifications. So this is different than the rest of the other states whose engines are listed here, who are fully staffed for use and response of those engines. So what we have to do is we have to pull from the shop. We have to pull from the districts. We're going to have to pull from somebody to get that engine out there on house draw, to get that engine that we're screaming for over here up on the Remington, because we don't have them staffed. So all of that is collateral part. There isn't actual staff that is seasonally staffed to run those engines.
Forster Norris,
Yeah.
can you tell us where those 4 engines are kept?
Yes, Chairman. I believe 1 engine is typically sitting in with the Helitack crew. 1 engine is up in Newcastle usually. And then the other 2 typically stay in Cheyenne, so that we have that shop foreman, engine boss can take it. So where they're located, where we have some staff that have the qualifications to take them. Great. Good question, though.
Go ahead, Representative Pendergraph.
Thank you. I see the type 3.4, type 5.6. Could you briefly explain that?
Jared,
Type. I'm not.
you can do that. What I'm
Go
going to have.
Phone-
I'm gonna have
All
Jared.
right. Chief Fox, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pendergraph, it's a resource typing. So a type 5, type 6 would be a pickup truck with 300 to 400 gallons of water. Type 3, type 4 is typically up to 600-700 gallons of water. Usually a 2-ton chassis. Think of a military deuce and a half type apparatus.
Okay. Next, I'm sorry, these are a little out of order, but I want to swing back to the hand crews, which is on page 2 at the bottom. So the state has 1 inmate hand crew, which we, again, provide all the training, the fire gear, the crew buggies, and the crew supervisors for the crew. And I'm going to go into detail about this program through this presentation. Where we have, and then we're going to move back to the other page with the aircraft, owned and contracted. This is where the state of Wyoming has invested in the aviation program. And you can see where we have come out pretty comparable in the aviation response. And we combined owned and contracted in that chart. We did not do a chart for a type 3 incident management team. We do not host one of those here in Wyoming. But I want to make sure everybody understands, because during last fire season we had so many fires and we had literally 1 heli-based person, 4 seasonals, and 4 crew soups. We were paying for everybody else's resources to put out our fires. That's what the EFSA paid for. We paid for the Southwest team to travel 2 days to help with the complex fires in August. We paid for teams to come across the West. We were very lucky Montana was not on fire the way they were. They would call and come down and help us. Colorado wasn't on fire as much. They would come up. And that's part of the challenge of trying to track down all these costs, is because we're still dealing with a bunch of bills from a ton of states that came in to help support these fires. So with that, I want to make sure you also understand the massive increase in fire billing workload that is being done. We have 1 fire business person for the state of Wyoming that does all the fire invoicing. And we've billed around $25 million of invoices for fiscal year 2025 between the two fire accounts. And obviously, we have much more to come. It's still coming. So on many of these fires, what's happening if the fire was ordering through that interagency dispatch center, the equipment would be days away. Because that you're going through a dispatch center, they're going through the federal access property. So the state doesn't have capacity to have state contracting. So we don't have equipment to just pull from on contract to go bring into a fire. And so the state would constantly be asked from these teams to do that, emergency contracts. And so we were constantly creating emergency contracts with our state foresters and that one fire business person. We were constantly being asked, the caterers days away on the elk fire, can you please pay for the food for the team for the next couple of days with your purchase cards? We maxed out our purchase cards almost every month between Jared, Sheila, and myself, and many of our other foresters, and all sorts of things that we don't have state contracting for. This is just an added thing that's happening on the back end in the finance world while these fires are being done, because we don't have these type of resources at our fingertips here in Wyoming. So now we're having to administer emergency contracts. We're having to audit them. We're going to pay for them through our fire invoicing system. On top of that, those FMEG fires, they do require an additional amount of paperwork for federal reimbursement process, and that just takes time. And we have to do that. We want to get reimbursed. So that is an additional workload that's occurring. The model of utilizing field foresters for fire leadership and one fire business person has really created large gaps in skills and knowledge. And the state and the counties are just not able to overcome these gaps anymore.
Forester Norris.
Yep.
One moment, please. Representative Harrelson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Barrett. Director Norris, sorry, I'm going to back up just a little bit. First of all, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for us as the legislature for not giving you the tools you need last year. Because that's what I'm hearing. I hear a little bit like a little desperation, like there's a little PTSD off of last year, right?
There's a lot of PTSD from last year.
Yeah. So I'm sorry for that. Talking about 4 engines, 2 in Cheyenne, 1 in Newcastle. Obviously, Newcastle would probably be for our team up there, or to help with that team of our smoke jumpers or our crew out of the correctional facility up there. But with your temporary rules that you've put into place, that we can manage our assets better as far as in the place. Like, I mean, I've had the opportunity of traveling around the state quite a bit in the last 3 days. And it's interesting because I was over in the Du Bois area where we've got a fire just below that, and it's dry and brown already. And then you'd go up into this country and it looks like Ireland, right? We don't need the equipment here right now as much as maybe we needed in that area. And so as we talk about that, what I'm hearing, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing right, and I think the numbers show this, we got 4 engines, which that's a whole nother conversation because that's sad in a way, probably, if we're being very honest. But we don't even have a crew. You have to keep them in those places because that's the only place you have a crew. Is that, am I hearing that right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yeah, that is correct. And even to staff that engine, if we were to try and staff an engine, we would be pulling our staff from their actual jobs. There's not firefighters attached to those engines. When Platte County calls because they are on fire and they need Gary Hobbs to come, he's coming and stepping away from his shop foreman job, pulling another mechanic or 2 and taking them up to help you with your fire.
Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Follow up on that, and I appreciate that. So as we look at this, though, let's talk real quick about scope for these fires. So as that call goes out, let's just look at obviously the jurisdictional side of things. We've got, let's say, Sawmill Fire that we had over there in Wheatland in the middle of January, right? Or I think it was January, February. I think I was in sessions when it lit. That didn't hit any public property. That was all private land. That one was a crazy burner. We just had crazy winds and had a lot of fuel still that hadn't laid down, all those things. Talked a little bit and just negligence probably on my part. Talk a little bit about the private sector where it's a fully on private land fire. And then let's say a piece that we've got 2 school sections, 640s in there of state land. And what's the responsibility? Can we just talk about that responsibility side of that real quick, where maybe we've got our local volunteer fire department fighting, and all of a sudden it goes into a more of a treacherous terrain school section, and maybe responsibility of state forestry in that realm.
Okay. Yeah, no, you're good. And you, both of you feel free. If you look in that map over there, you see a lot of blue. Campbell County carries a ton of state land. We have a lot of experience on this in this county, putting out fires on state lands. The mutual aid periods, we all agree to. So when you have a fire, just like we've talked about, we're going to go put it out. And we really believe in these closest resources. So whatever is going to be there is going to be there. And we have built off of the last decade some really solid relationships with our federal partners to also help us respond. Some of them, as JR is talking about, the BLM scans and they will just go self-dispatch themselves to some of Campbell County's fires, whether it's on state or private, for example. So while that fire is going on private land, it's going on private land. When that local jurisdiction says, I'm beyond capacity, like they're calling us, they're calling our duty officer, they're calling for the helicopter, they're saying, typically what happened last summer is, I need a type 3 IC, I need a team, right? So we'd have the Owen fire down, in Albany County, and at the same time, we had the Badger fire going up in Sheridan County, and both of them are screaming for type 3 ICs, and we can't find them for them, right? So we're trying to figure out how we're going to set them up to just handle the fire with what they have. And so we'll send them to whatever it is. Now, if that fire goes into state lands, we become an administrator. We're a group partner, and we have a say in what resources are ordering and financial. We are now carrying a financial burden, but I don't have any more resources. It's not like I'm sending you more. I'm just telling you, just like I'm going to tell you when it's your own private land, the county's their own private land, put the fire out, order what you need. Well, we are going to take care of you on the back end with the pain when you need that. But we need you to just order what you need. We can't let that first 12 to 24 hours is so critical. And so that doesn't change whether it's state or private lands. And unless the counties want to speak on this, I don't know if you see it any differently. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, let me add just a little additional color. I think it's an excellent question. It's really, really relevant, and it's important for everybody to understand. Wyoming State Forestry Division doesn't have firefighters that respond to those blue sections on the map up there, the school sections, or any of the state administered lands. So who does? The local fire districts do. The answer is earlier during the LSO presentation this morning, it was mentioned that collectively there's $130 million in local taxation that provides fire suppression. That's what pays for fire suppression on those local fires, local privately owned fires, but also the state sections as well. So when there's a fire that occurs that crosses into that state section in your example, the local fire department is who puts that out and who covers that cost of.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Mr. Chairman, just maybe a little bit of insight, I guess. As I understand, Wyoming State Forestry has 8 seasonal firefighters assigned to the Helitack crew. So 8 firefighters for the state of Wyoming. My organization hires 12 seasonal firefighters. So I have more seasonal fire staff than state forestry does. So just for a little context.
And we're going to talk about that next. That's great add-in, because Wyoming State Forestry is continuing to push our staff to fill multiple position responsibilities, which does have fiscal implications. Wyoming State Forestry had approximately $337,000 in overtime. that was billed to fires in fiscal year 2025 for approximately 35 employees. And remember, fiscal year started July 1st, 2024. From those 35 employees, State Forestry had 100,000 miles driven on vehicles that we have to absorb into our normal budget as well. Now, none of my time was charged, so you got my time for free. You did receive an additional 32 days or 6.5 weeks of free time between the months of August, September, and October, all given to you on behalf of your state forester. So that does not count the rest of the year or the free time that's been given by my family or all of our employees' families that are trying to support us in this workload. This is not sustainable, and it is a major red flag for our staff when it comes to their safety, their home work-life balance, and real burnout that's happening. Wildland firefighter fighting is a profession, and it should not be considered a collateral duty. Wildland incidents requires professionals to have years of fire experience and training to put these fires out on the ground with all kinds of operational experience, all kinds of this heavy equipment coming in. You have to know the difference between a type 2 dozer and a type 3, and if you need a grader here or there. You have multiple types of hand crews. You have hot shot crews, smoke busters, you have the inmate crews, and then do you need smoke jumpers? You need to know these things while you have large aviation in the air. You have to know the difference between needing a helicopter, what level, type 1, 2, or 3. You need to know what kind of large air tanker you need and where you need to put it. This is all happening while evacuations and enclosures are occurring. These positions have many dangerous and life-threatening events that occur as a requirement of the job, and people die every year in forestry and fire work-related accidents. I do want to hit on the smoke buster because I know that was a question earlier. So another significant change that has occurred to state forestry in the last 8 years has been the reduction of the inmate hand crews within the program. So previously, before 2017, Wyoming State Forestry had 3 20-person inmate hand crew programs. So we had 1 located in Riverton and 2 located in Newcastle. Currently, the state is down to 1 crew, and this has had momentous impacts when it comes to not being able to support wildland fire suppression on the ground across Wyoming. State Forestry right now is utilizing grant funding to pay each inmate above the DOC pay rate to work for the Smoke Buster program as an incentive, which has really been helping bring our numbers back up to a full hand crew. We had 3 vacant crew supervisor positions that we just couldn't refill, and so we reclassified them as fire trainers this spring.
Forrester.
Oh, yep.
No, please.
Yeah.
Senator Driscoll. Please.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Forster Norris, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Could you give us an estimate of what it would cost to get us back up to 3 teams? I think part of this is resource related. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Do we need another full-time person or something of the sort? To me, this is priority. These crews are really important around the state. And is there potential to go to more than 3 potentially if we provided the right amount of resources? Because I think we need to look the same way we did with the air end, is what resources does it take to fully do this right? I mean, you can give us levels, but we need to know what it costs to do it right. Thank you.
I'm going to ask our staff for our next meeting, to ask the Department of Corrections to be here to answer their side of this question. But if you could go ahead, Forster Norris, and answer your side of this question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think that's going to be possible. We don't have enough. We are really struggling right now. We have worked really hard to get to 1 crew. Again, it's voluntary. Again, there's just what our requirements are. Remember, we have who can go out to do it, number 1. Many of these are now going to probation. And so they're not staying in the system like they used to. So we don't have the pool of inmates. We also we've looked at increasing, we've looked at doing a lot of things. And we are really excited that we got to over 20 this year. That's the first time we've got to over 20 in years, since before COVID. So there's a major challenge in looking at how we're going to be able to do that. And then I do agree, I think DOC needs to weigh in on their staffing, their abilities, because remember, it takes them, and I just sent Director Shannon an email this week thanking him and his staff. We got the call for the smoke buster crew late in the night. The staff had to turn around, make breakfast and lunch for them immediately. And then if they are out on a fire, they have to provide staff to overnight. And so they have to move around and figure out how to even have somebody there. And that they worked so hard last summer to make that happen for those inmate crews. We also are really, really struggling with filling those crew supervisor positions. So this isn't just Wyoming, this is a national issue that's happening. We're seeing just the reductions in these inmate hand crews. The population isn't what it used to be.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. And part of this will be prisons is perhaps a change in law that says we can use a different class of prisoners for some of this, is assuming that corrections felt that way. Second, would we get more quote, quote volunteers if we up the pay end that you were talking about? Same way with supervisors is, I think it's a problem across all of it, as I've watched it with foresters. If you don't pay enough, you don't get anybody even apply for the job, more or less someone bad. What does it take? And that's what I'm asking, is in a package, and probably you conjunction with corrections is, obviously it's cheaper, but maybe corrections needs a couple of full-time people for those crews that are ready to go that we pay. I guess to me, the prevention on these fires is unbelievably cheap when it's in comparison when you look what's happened to the big fires. And for me, for the state to invest some, and maybe some of them end up going pretty far to do some of them if we provide the right resources. But I also think it's good for the prisoners, is, you know, it can't be good just to be locked up. If someone's of a safety level, it seems to make sense to me to put her.
Mr. Chairman, and one of the crew supervisors that we have now invest quite a bit into those inmate firefighters, and they're empowered. They're running chainsaws. They're firefighters. We are. That's why we pay them year round $1 more now, is because we expect them to be firefighters ready to go. It doesn't matter any time of year. They've been going out to fires any time of year. With that, they're being empowered to make real decisions. They're certified, NWCG certified when they come out. And then we have nothing for them to go into. Because we don't have, we're looking at specifically holding a helitack position, but we don't have another crew. And the thing with the inmate program, remember, is they are tied to certain locations. There's only certain locations. But we'll continue to talk about this, because there's opportunities, but you're not off that. The crews it's been a real loss to the system.
And on that note, Forrester, federal crews, are there federal crews where these inmates, when they get out of the system, could integrate into?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I want to answer only what I know, and I think this is a good question for also DOC. We've been working with them. We met because they're on the post-release stuff. We've been looking into this actually quite a bit. They have to go into a transition place or transition home. They have a check-in person. That is something that we believe we at state level, state to state, could coordinate and work with. It would be pretty hard because those crews are gone. They're not tied every day to a location. It's different when you're a state asset and you're a state resources, and we're not letting our helitack leave, or we're not, if we were to have a crew, we wouldn't let them leave, right? We don't let the smoke busters leave very frequently. And so it's a lot different when you're a national resource. You're a national resource, and you may be in Wyoming, and you may spend the rest of your summer in Oregon. And so that is something that is very hard for them to overcome.
I do know that we have programs for the military where people who've been through corrections have ended up in the military. So maybe there's an opportunity here too. We'll want to look into that with the Department of Corrections and ask those questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What we did do we had 3 vacant crew supervisor positions that we've been really struggling to fill. So what we did is, based on the response from the counties and the flexibility we had within the budget lines of each of those positions, this spring, we reclassified 3 of those positions to fire trainers, and we put them across the state. So adding that one more person out in Pinedale, in Riverton, that one person is just going to add capacity to response and fire, and possibly we could now fulfill an engine, with those trainers in the future this summer. So that we're really working on trying to evolve with what we have, being as effective and diligent with the positions we have and the resources we have to respond to wildfire this year. I do want to talk about wildfire prevention and mitigation programs. The state relies very heavily on federal funding to implement these programs. The state cooperative fire and volunteer fire assistance grants help fund prevention preparedness, such as the training, the gear, the equipment for wildland fire for state forestry and to the local entities. Wyoming State Forestry has a fuels mitigation coordinator who oversees 3 different federal grants that project proposals are annually applied for. So we have the Western Wildland Urban Interface Grants, the Community Assistant Funds adjacent to National Forests, and the Community Wildfire Defense Grants. All come through State Forestry's Fuel Mitigation Coordinator, and these result in projects, education, and that planning coordination with the counties. There is an immense workload to apply, review, administer, and report on within these multiple projects and contracts being done across the state annually. Lastly, I want to provide the committee a federal policy update, specifically when it comes to the president's budget, the new timber executive order, and the new wildfire executive order. First, with the presidential timber executive order, the immediate expansion of the American timber production was signed March 1st, 2025, and has directed federal land management agencies to increase their timber outputs, while all of them are reducing their staff over the last several months. So this has put a real spotlight on State Forestry's Good Neighbor Authority program. And good Senator Larson was with me last week with the Select Federal to talk about this. There's a real push to put more work through that program, as it's been successful in the effectiveness through our state timber contracting systems. So while our mills in Wyoming are barely hanging on, our foresters right now are being asked to do more, to get more done on federal timber and get it out and available. On June 12th, 2025, the Wildfire Executive Order empowering common sense wildfire prevention and response was signed by President Trump. This executive order is focused on federal agencies to better consolidate and coordinate their fire programs. It is not putting them together yet, but it's directing them. So in 90 days from now, if you were a BLM firefighter or a Forest Service firefighter, you're still going to be a BLM firefighter and Forest Service firefighter. They're not, that takes an act of Congress, but the president is directing some consolidation and coordination together for that. It also encourages local and state wildfire preparedness and response, specifically calling out to develop new policies that remove barriers to preventing and responding to wildfires, including through year-round readiness, better forest health, and activities outlined in the Timber Executive Order. Within the president's budget, it does have some significant changes being proposed that will impact Wyoming State Forestry's budget if it is as approved. All the state and private federal grants that come through the U.S. Forest Service, that's the cooperative fire, the volunteer fire assistance funding, has all been zeroed out for 2026 budget. The state has not received any funding coming from the Forest Service for these grants from the 2025 budget that was approved. This represents approximately $1.7 million in loss annually to Wyoming State Forestry's budget, which is a 25% reduction. In 2020, with the budget cuts, State Forestry moved staff salaries into these federal grants, and approximately 16% of our staff are funded through these federal grants. So State Forestry will continue to update this committee as decisions are made on this final presidential budget, but there could be a real change in our funding that we depend on moving forward. And I covered a lot. I'm gonna stop and pass it on to Shad unless there's any questions. Thank
Any
you.
questions from the committee? Seeing none. Chief Cooper?
Thank you for that, State Forester and Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Excuse me. I wanted to talk about what are the counties currently doing to address, what's the current status? What's the status quo that we're doing? And one of the things I wanted to hit on is there's 23 different county fire wardens that manage fire 23 different ways in Wyoming. There's not a lot of side rails in the existing statute that define exactly what the duties and responsibilities are. And what that means is based on capacity. And I think earlier this morning, State Forester Norris had mentioned that there's about 1/3 of the county fire wardens that are full-time paid. There's about 1/3 of them that are part-time. And generally speaking, they have other duties and responsibilities. They might be the road and bridge superintendent or the emergency manager, or additional duties and responsibilities beyond being the wildland fire manager. And then there's the last third of the county fire wardens are volunteer and completely volunteer. And so what that means is there's a significant amount of complexity on how we respond to create that common operating picture that I was explaining this morning that was so important. So I wanted to start with that and say that what I'm getting ready to describe is kind of some broad strokes of what most of the counties do, but certainly not all of them. And then there's varying degrees of success with some of these things. But generally speaking, the counties try to focus on prevention, and I'm sure I'm not unique in the fact that I try to put as much effort into preventing a fire because we're much more effective in reducing cost and saving lives and preventing impact to property if we can stop that fire from ever occurring to begin with. And so we put a tremendous amount of time and effort into public education. And Representative Harrelson had asked a question earlier this morning about the interface with the public and the importance of that public education. A big part of prevention is interfacing with the communities that are at risk. And one of the things that we found locally that's been fairly successful, we've only got 3 ambassadors so far, but what we've done is created what we call an ambassador program where we meet with the communities that are at risk of wildland fire, and we try to find the spark plug, the person in that community that really is engaged and wants to be part of the solution. And we ask them to volunteer their time to work, at a grassroots level with their community members and talk about the importance of wildland fire and public education and have these community events. And we've got a barbecue coming up here next week where we're getting everybody together. And during that barbecue, all I'm going to do is bring our staff in, our volunteer firefighters, to talk to them about what they can do to improve their homes. We call it home hardening, using fire-resistant construction materials to, build their deck from instead of, combustible materials from their deck, or there's, I don't want to go into details, but there's a lot of work that we can do just to choose the right construction materials. And then beyond the home, how do we reduce the hazardous fuels around our home? What do we use for shrubbery and trees and grass around the home? How can we reduce the risk right adjacent to the home? And then we have these intermediate levels of risk. They call it the defensible space of 30 foot, 60 foot, and 90 foot away from the home. So, how can we reduce the hazardous fuel, the accumulation, the buildup of fuel around the homes? Well, all of that comes down to public education. And so what we do is we try to, at a local level, and like I said earlier, all 23 counties do this to different degrees, but we try to interface and meet with our public to educate them on the specific wildland fire risks and what they can do personally reduce those risks. So that's a big part of the prevention component and that interface with the public that I was trying to address. Beyond that, we also do fuel reduction recommendations. Chief Fox had mentioned that they hired a WUI coordinator that their job is to bring that special expertise and actually meet with the landowners and actually do a survey and assessment and make recommendation on which trees and write a prescription, so to speak, on how to reduce those trees. In Sublette County, we're doing the exact same thing right now. We've actually got an open position we're currently advertising for to also hire a WUI coordinator. I do want to make a point, though, is that that's specifically a grant-funded position. We have an NGO that is interested in working with Sublette County to address and reduce that risk of wildland fire and the impact to the community and specifically to the watershed in Sublette County. And so that NGO is working with us to help fund that position to reduce that risk of wildland fire. But that position, their job is to reduce hazardous fuels, and that's one of the things that we do is the public education, but then providing assistance to our communities. But then the next thing we do is we also try to go after grant funding. Again, we don't fund this locally. We don't have the revenue. We don't have the capacity at a local level to pay to reduce this hazardous fuels. So we seek grant funding, which State Forest and Norris had addressed. There's 3 or 4 different major grants that we apply for competitively. That help the local landowners to actually pay for the cost of administering the contracts and bringing in timber contractors to reduce that hazardous fuel. But that's kind of the prevention component of what we do at a local level that I really wanted to illustrate. The public education, the home hardening, the hazardous fuel reduction, and then the community preparedness. That's the evacuation planning that Chief Fox had mentioned earlier, and the importance of the preparedness of the ready, set, go. That's all before there's ever smoke in the air. That's what your local fire departments all across the state of Wyoming are doing to mitigate and reduce the risk of wildland fire in their communities. We also spend a tremendous amount of time on training. Chief Fox had mentioned earlier that was one of the lessons learned from last year's fire, and one of the successes was thank God we didn't hurt or kill anybody. That's huge. We need to make sure that we spend so much more time on training and then meeting the national standards, that when we order resources and we give assignments, that everybody has that common operating picture I keep talking about. The training is what makes that happen. And we train at a local level. Our volunteer firefighters train every week and it's seasonally, we train on wildland fires, but we also train on car wrecks and structure fires and hazmat response and everything else you can imagine. But we train at the beginning of the season for the upcoming wildland fire season. And then we train, on our weekly training nights for our volunteers, but then we also have preseason preparedness days where we get together with our state and federal partners and spend what we call it all fire days in Sublette County, but we get everybody together for an entire day and just kind of prepare for a large wildland fire and make sure that our radios can talk to each other, make sure that we know who's in charge and what the notification protocols are. And we actually run through a simulated event, and we do that every year. And I can go into great detail about the training, but that's the point I'm trying to make, is that's one of the things that we do at a local level, and with great assistance from state forestry, is to ensure the safety of our volunteer firefighter and our the Wyoming Fire Service, the career firefighters, everybody. Coordination, and that's the next thing I wanted to hit on, and I mentioned it earlier this morning, was the coordination piece, the creation of the annual operating plans, the creation of the mutual aid agreements, the preseason meetings, the making sure that our radios talk to each other. There's a tremendous amount of difference in radios in the state of Wyoming and our ability to communicate using the WildLink system, using our local systems. We have to work all that out each year and make sure that if there's any changes, that we get our radios programmed. We have to make sure that we work with our dispatch system. There's interagency dispatch systems that work for the Forest Service and the BLM, but there's also 911 dispatch centers that work for system we're calling, and where those additional firefighters are coming from. The coordination piece, and again, I could spend hours talking about just coordination, but I'll move on. And then finally, the suppression. That's where the meat and potatoes of what the local volunteer fire department does. And I shouldn't say volunteer. There's Wyoming is a variety of volunteer combination and career firefighters, but when we respond to suppress wildland fires, that emergency response, that initial attack takes a tremendous amount of work for our volunteer firefighter. I keep saying volunteer, from our firefighters. We have to respond and put the fire out. And earlier this morning, again, I'll bring your attention, but collectively, the state of Wyoming, the local governments are contributing $130 million in their budgets to make sure that we can respond to those local fires and suppress the state sections that we talked about earlier. And then in the midst of all that, the evacuation and everything that goes along with that. But the summary of what I'm trying to get to is when somebody calls 911, it goes to our 911 dispatch center, and then we send the closest resource. And it doesn't matter if it's the local volunteer fire department or the adjacent municipal fire department, the career fire department, or the state of Wyoming, or the Forest Service, the BLM. It doesn't matter. We all go. And then once we get to the fire, we determine whose jurisdiction it is, who's responsible for where the land was that fire started on. And then we figure out how to share our resources, or if it's necessary, if we can go back. But one thing that's really critical, and I really want to drive home an important point here, is our Wyoming Fire Service is not capable of maintaining a long-term presence on these fires for multiple days and weeks and months on end. I'm gonna pull up a handout here in a minute, but about 85% of Wyoming is volunteer firefighters. That means that they've got a job they have to return to. So they've got a couple hours, they can respond to that wildland fire, do the best we can to put it out. But at the end of that, they've got to go back to their jobs. They can't stay for the next day. So what generally happens for most of this of Wyoming is we're pretty good at being self-sufficient and managing that fire for the first 24 hours. Maybe some of the bigger fire departments are good for the first 36 hours, or even up to 72 hours. And like Chief Fox mentioned earlier, he's got some capacity, some seasonal firefighters that he hires each year that can help extend that a little bit further even. But that's a unique example. The vast majority of the Wyoming Fire Service is really capable of managing a wildland fire for about the first 24 to maybe up to at max 72 hours. Well, then what do we do when we have those unique fires, those large fires, the EFSA fires that take management beyond that 72-hour mark? Well, that's a critical gap that we don't have a solution for right now. Now, we have some recommendations. We're going to get to that this afternoon on what we think we can do as Wyoming Fire Service to address that. But right now, I want everybody to understand is there's a huge gap in our ability to manage past that first, those first few operational periods. The other thing I wanted to make everybody aware of is when we respond to a wildland fire, those operational resources, those local fire departments are managed by the local fire chief or the county fire warden. They're not managed by the state forester or any of the state forester staff. So why that's important is we respond to wildland fires, and we do everything we can to put out those fires. But when we need to move firefighters around from one county to another, or have some flexibility and positioning those resources, the state of Wyoming doesn't have any capacity to do that. State forester doesn't have any ability to reach in and pull a hand crew or an engine or whatever out of Sublette County and move it to Teton County or whatever it is. So right now, fires are managed on a very hyper local level and managed by the county fire warden or the fire district chief or whatever level of government administration they have. But where I'm trying to get everybody to understand is that's how we currently fight fire. There's some opportunities for improvement that we all see, and one of our recommendations this afternoon is to increase that capacity so that we can fill that critical gap beyond that 24 to 72 hour mark that we have, and then also allow for some flexibility to move critical resources around the state of Wyoming based on severity, based on indices that say that it's critically dry in this part of the state, but it's green in that part of the state. Let's have some flexibility where we can move those firefighters around where they're needed. All right. So I want to bring your attention to something. So you should have a handout that we distributed that is it's called the Wyoming Fire Service Career Combination and Volunteer Firefighters Recruitment and Retention. And this handout, we actually distributed this handout in 2024 for the legislative session in 2024. Rather than recreate this handout, we just reprinted it and distributed it to you again today. Even though it's been a year and a half since we originally created this handout, I really think there's some great information that doesn't warrant redoing another survey and getting the information out of this handout a second time. So I'm going to walk everybody through this handout because it really gives you a snapshot of the current state of affairs and how we fight fire in Wyoming. All right, so on the first page of the fire, it says that there, according to an NFPA survey, there's currently 141 fire departments in the state of Wyoming. These fire departments are funded either by the municipality, by the county, by a by a special fire protection district, or a few cases they're funded by like an industrial fire brigade, like for, I think Sinclair Refinery, they might have an industrial fire brigade that helps protect fire protection for them. All right, so of those 141 fire departments, there's approximately 3,637 firefighters in the state of Wyoming, according to our Wyoming Fire Service Directory. 88.6% of those firefighters are volunteer firefighters, either partly or mostly volunteer firefighters. 11.4% are career, either full career or mostly career fire departments, according to the National Fire Department Registry. Statewide, and now this is a little bit dated, but as of 2024, when we created this document, statewide, we responded to 43,855 incidents on average. And there's actually a pie chart there that kind of breaks down what types of incidents we respond to. And you'll see the 66% of those incidents are actually EMS incidents. Those are vastly handled by the larger municipal fire departments that provide EMS services. The smaller fire departments in the state, we assist with EMS services, kind of call when needed, but we don't provide EMS as the primary service. Many fire departments do, many fire departments don't. It's kind of a mixed bag on how we address EMS in the state of Wyoming. But I wanted to bring your attention to of that 43,000 number, 66% of those are EMS calls. So let's focus on the remainder of those calls, though. I can tell you in Sublette County, we respond to more car wrecks than anything else. That's kind of our number one call volume. We have long highways and a lot of car wrecks. Second to that, though, is wildland fires. We respond to a tremendous amount of wildland fires in Sublette County. Most of those wildland fires are agricultural ditch burning types of fires that are pretty easy to handle. And then after wildland fires, then next we go to a lot of hazmat calls. Somebody struck a natural gas line or something like that. And then finally, the fourth most common type of incident we go to is structure fires in Sublette County. And that's kind of representative. The most of the state of Wyoming is pretty similar to that. And if I discount false alarms and so on.
Could you explain good intent, that piece of information there for the committee, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A good intent call means that we responded and were canceled en route before we got on scene. So, we had every intent to respond to that incident, handle the incident, and additional information comes on, the deputy gets on scene and just cancels us en route. So really the good intent call means majority of the time canceled en route. All right. So that's kind of a breakdown of a snapshot of how the Wyoming Fire Service is comprised, what types of calls we go to, whether or not we're career or not, or volunteer or not. But one of the things that the reason why we created this document in 2024, if you remember, there were several bills that we identified as being a critical gap. We've seen a significant reduction in the amount of volunteers in the state of Wyoming. And we were trying to address a recruitment and retention need for the state of Wyoming. And in 2024, that was our primary objective, was to try to address that critical gap. And so we had recommended, we'd worked with the State Labor Committee, Labor Health and Social Services Committee, to draft up about 4 bills, 3 of which were successful to help address that gap. The jury's still out if there's going to be any improvement in the overall number of volunteer firefighters in the state of Wyoming, or I should say firefighters. We were trying to address career firefighters as well. But the thing that is important for you to understand in this document is that we sent out a statewide survey and we asked the Wyoming Fire Service, what's the biggest challenge that you're faced with right now? And every fire department that responded said we're absolutely struggling with keeping and retaining our existing members and then recruiting new members. It's just an overwhelming, and speaking as a fire chief, that's probably the single biggest thing that I spend the most of my time on, is addressing recruitment and retention within my own organization. And when I speak to fire chiefs across the rest of the state, they're all faced with the exact same challenges that I'm faced with. So the survey said that 88.8% of the fire departments in Wyoming are experiencing significant challenges with recruiting new firefighters. 92% believe that we needed a statewide recruitment and retention program. 29% are currently below full staffing levels. And at the time of this survey, we needed approximately 468 firefighters. We were 468 firefighters short. All right, so why am I bringing this to your attention? Well, the reason why I'm trying to bring this and put it on your radar is because right now, the way we fight wildland fire is we rely on the local jurisdictions to respond and put these fires out. Well, what's going to happen if we continue to see the downward trend of availability of firefighters in the state of Wyoming? We're not going to be there to put those fires out. We don't have the capacity to put those fires out. And if we continue to see the downward decline of the availability of these fire departments and these firefighters, the impact is going to be we're not going to be able to handle these fires anymore. And those small fires that we're currently capturing and extinguishing and putting out, they're going to get away from us because we don't have the personnel.
Chief Cooper, go ahead.
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Sherman.
Chairman. Chief, do we have an age,
We do.
average age of those firefighters in the state of Wyoming? Because just it's from what I've seen as I've been having these conversations, that's a concern of mine.
Go ahead, Chief.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's an excellent question. On page 5 of your handout, it says the average age of volunteer firefighters is increasing and there's actually a national survey according to the National Volunteer Fire Councils and communities that have fewer than 2,500 people in their population, which is really the vast majority of Wyoming. You'll see that 34% of the makeup of the firefighters are over 50. And that's increasing. Anecdotally, I can attest to that. My own fire department, we have many firefighters that are well into their 50s. I have firefighters that are 60 and 70 years old that are volunteering their time to help their communities. And one of my biggest challenges is trying to make sure do I assign the right tasks to those firefighters so I'm not asking them to do something that's physically arduous or dangerous to them. So there's a whole process, but yeah, it's a huge challenge. Is not only is there a reduction in the total number of volunteers, but the age of those volunteers is increasing and it's not being replaced. And I can go into great detail. We've actually done a lot of research about how and why this is occurring. But there, again, speaking anecdotally, post-COVID, there's been a change in the demographic of who those volunteers are, who makes up the volunteers that come and apply to join our volunteer fire department. There's been a change in the workforce. The work from home are they're less engaged community members that aren't necessarily working on Main Street, Wyoming. They're working from their home and they're not engaging with their communities and volunteering with the local volunteer fire department like we saw. There's been a huge increase in inflation, and there's so many more people that have to work 1 or 2 or more jobs. They don't have time to be a volunteer firefighter anymore because they're doing everything they can to make ends meet and pay the bills. And so all of these things are contributing to the reduction in the available workforce. That reduction scares me, and I want to make sure that everybody understands what I'm saying is that reduction scares me, and I think it should scare everybody in the state of Wyoming, because if that reduction continues on the current downward trend, we are not going to be able to fight these fires. We're going to have more large wildland fires because they escape, because we're not able to capture them and keep them small. And that's so critical to understand.
Chief Cooper, one moment and I'll get to you there, Representative Angelos. You said you had a lot of data on this issue. I'd just like to hear one piece of it. Is the trend that you're talking about, is it the same in Wyoming as it is nationally, or is it really just in Wyoming that we're seeing this kind of a trend?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when we put this white paper together that we distributed to you, we pulled a lot of data from national sources, from the National Volunteer Fire Council, from the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and many other, National Fire Protection Association. But the other thing we did, though, is we actually sent out a statewide survey, and we asked all of the fire departments in the state of Wyoming to collectively submit their answers and try to measure exactly the gap you're talking about. We also had several meetings where we face-to-face meetings where we brought the fire chiefs together and just asked them, what are your challenges? Why are these challenges existing? What is it? The answer to your question is Wyoming's recruitment and retention challenges exactly match the national statistics, and everything that we saw that we were pulling data from on a national level was mirrored at a local level.
Representative Angelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good point.
Chief Cooper, a question for you. What's the minimum age of volunteer firefighters?
Chief.
Representative Barrett, 2 questions. I'll answer your question, Representative Angelos. So every fire department comes up with their own standards. In Sublette County, we do have a cadet program where we can recruit from the local high school. Our minimum age is 16 years old. There's a tremendous amount of supervision necessary and a lot of restrictions on their ability to respond to hazardous environments. And it's more of a vocational education. It's a benefit for the local community. It's actually minimally available as a benefit to me to respond to wildland fires. I mean, it's more like building the next generation of volunteer firefighters, though, and we do put a tremendous amount of effort into that, and that's a great example of one of the successes that we've had in trying to recruit the next generation of firefighters and also address the age gap that Representative Harrelson had talked about. But it's different. Most fire departments, the average age is going to be minimum of 18 years old, and there may be different pockets even above that.
Senator Smith.
Hey, first, thanks for a great job last summer. Really, it was phenomenal, and I'm very interested in giving you more aerial assets. But my question is, so volunteer firefighters get a some sort of retirement pension, and that seems like it would be a phenomenal selling point if you guys were to market that. I think most people don't know that. And I think especially with a lot of people having economic hard times with the dollar not going near as far as it used to, I think that it would be a good something for us to look at. If you could just briefly describe that to us, so maybe we can put feelers out as well.
Chief Cooper. And I've got a question or a comment on this. Chief Fox had mentioned the PR effort that you're going to be engaging in. So we certainly want to hear what your thoughts are on the retirement opportunity.
Thank you for that. That's an excellent question. And Senator Driscoll had mentioned that this morning as well. Here's what I'll walk you through it. In the mid 60s, I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head, we created the volunteer fire pension program. And what it was is it was intended as a recruitment incentive to allow some sort of a pension for these volunteer firefighters. And it was very, very minuscule at the time that it was created. At the time, it was, I can't tell you the history of what it cost to contribute to it, but it was completely self-funded by the volunteers. They paid for their own contributions. Many fire departments in the state of Wyoming today also make their volunteer firefighters pay for their own contributions to that account. It's really a case-by-case basis. Some fire
May I
departments.
interject on that real fast? Just important, Mr.
Go ahead,
Mayor.
Senator.
I don't understand. So they're volunteers. And so we're asking them to pay money for a retirement and they're volunteering their time. Is that correct? Or are we paying them something when they're fighting the fires?
Chief Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, my recommendation would be to bring the Wyoming retirement system, maybe Lanny Applegate as a representative would be an excellent person to go into great detail about that. But I can't answer the general, because he can give you the exact numbers and how many firefighters contribute themselves versus how many communities pay for that cost. The answer I can give you is that some fire departments in the state of Wyoming do ask their own volunteer firefighters to contribute the contribution necessary to cover that retirement on their own. They actually cut a check to their fire department. The fire department then submits that check to the state of Wyoming to cover that contribution. It's about $18.75 per month. And I can't tell you exactly how many fire departments do that. That's a question that the Wyoming retirement system certainly could answer. What I can tell you is other fire departments in the state of Wyoming cover that cost as a benefit. And Sublette County, that's one of the things that I have a line item in my budget, and I cover that cost as a recruitment benefit. And I think Representative Bear was alluding to a question earlier. I've actually got a handout, and every single time that I have an opportunity to interface with the public, I distribute that handout. And on the handout, I give all those financial benefits of what it means to join the volunteer fire department. And there's things like we have an AD&D policy. We have some meals that we provide for our firefighters, for the community meetings. In the handout, the first thing, the very top of the list is the ability to access the Wyoming retirement system. And that's one of the biggest things that I find that I can go meet with the local ranching community and hand that out and say, hey, look, here's it's not much. I mean, nobody's going to get rich being a volunteer firefighter, and you're certainly not going to have a retirement being a volunteer firefighter. But based on your age of entry, when you retire, you might have a couple $100s a month that will help you with your pension when it's that time. And many firefighters very much appreciate that. And I think Senator Driscoll had asked a question earlier. Does that not only recruit firefighters, but does it retain the firefighters? And I can tell you in my own organization, the answer is unequivocally yes. I have many volunteer firefighters that have told me that hey, I'm going to stick around for a couple more years because I want to continue to build that retirement as much as I can. And it's only a few bucks, but it'll help me with half of a car payment or something when I get to that point where I'm starting to draw. So many volunteer firefighters not only join the volunteer fire department, but stay on the volunteer fire department as a result of the success of that retirement program. It's a huge benefit, and we need to continue to promote that and support that in the future. And thank you on a personal level. Thank you to every legislator for all of your work to continue to support that. We've been in front of you many times over the years, and it's been a great program and hugely beneficial. And I'm telling you, it absolutely makes a difference. Thank you to everybody for all your support. But I want to circle back on something. One of the things that, and maybe I'm off topic here, but I think it's important. One of the things that's really critical about that retirement system that's important for the recruitment and retention is that it not only brings firefighters to the organization, but it keeps them in the organization. One of the recommendations that came out of this white paper last year was that we looked at health insurance, because that's another thing there's so many people in Wyoming that are either underinsured or uninsured that would benefit if they could access health insurance for an affordable rate. And so one of the things that we did 2 years ago was we created the ability to access the state of Wyoming's healthcare benefit. If you're a volunteer firefighter, you can do that. The problem with that is it's cost prohibitive. And I can't cite the exact number, but ballpark, it's about $1,000 a month for an individual firefighter. And back to the point that Senator Smith was making, right now what we're doing is we're asking those individual volunteer firefighters to pay that $1,000 a month to the fire department that then contributes that to the state of Wyoming. Well, it's not being used much right now because of it's cost prohibitive. Most people that join the volunteer fire department, they're not going to pay on top of giving their time, pay for the privilege of accessing that healthcare benefit. It's just it's too much money, and so it's not being used. So we're trying right now as a state of Wyoming Fire Service to address that and see if we can overcome some of those gaps and provide some financial incentive to maybe cover some of that cost and then bring more volunteer firefighters to the state. All right, I'm off topic. I didn't mean to talk to you about recruitment and retention.
Chief, that I think it's important for us to hear that. I think the fact that you have to be in shape to be a firefighter and you could get health insurance, I think it goes hand in glove. So that's interesting. Wish we could get more people to take advantage of it. Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question. I think that was really important information for us to understand in terms of retention and recruitment. I'm wondering if from you or from our staff, we could get data on which departments or I forgot the word, sorry, which fire departments are helping with those contributions for those volunteers and which are not, or if there's a combination there of how people approach that as an incentive. And then what would the cost be if the state of Wyoming covered those contributions for those volunteers? Thank you.
Okay, Chief Fox, could you just let us know where Campbell County is on that issue?
Mr. Chairman, similar to Sublette County, we cover that contribution for our volunteers. We also do offer a supplemental insurance. So if we had a volunteer who was injured on a fire, that supplemental would actually bridge their income from their full-time job. So we purchase that on their behalf as well.
And Chief, I would assume that if they were injured on the job, that the state would cover whatever medical expenses they would need for that injury. Was that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. We do have a workman's comp on our volunteers as well. So that does cover all their medical expenses as well.
Chief or Forrester Norris, you
And-
looked like you wanted to add.
I was just going to add, so none of the state of Wyoming employees get firefighter retirement. Not a single one of them while they're out on the fire line right now. The Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service, you have to be hired on in fuels or fire by age 37. So we typically hire on our staff. We had GNA program manager running the Pleasant Valley Fire, IC3. We had our stewardship program coordinator out on an engine on the house straw, right? They all left for the BLM because they were getting close to the age 37. We've lost our hello base. We've lost most of our staff. When they get to that age, that firefighter retirement is extremely, extremely important to those firefighters. So just to give you a heads up that that is also missing at the state level, because they're foresters. We do not have firefighter jobs or family. We don't have a wildland fire family that we hire them into.
Forester Norris, these state employees, though, they do have state retirement, correct?
That is correct. They have state retirement with the state pension and things like that. But as you have your police officers and your Plan B, they do not get Plan B. That's because they're foresters and they're signed up as foresters versus signed up as a wildland firefighter position.
Okay, Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to clarify, could it be a situation where, and I want to be careful of how I use that term because I don't want it to sound bad at all, but could there be an opportunity to them to almost double that up, where they could be in that fire as well? And I'm getting head shakes. No. So you're saying we're losing them to BLM because in that case, they have a better retirement plan through the BLM than we do as the state. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Chairman, Representative. They're able to retire earlier because just like police officers or emergency, they are expected to be done in their jobs, not working in their 60s out on fire, right? They're expected to and retire from those type of responsibilities. And so that's why there's a cutoff age even to get into with the federal agencies, because that 20 years, they better be retired in that from 57, they're expected to be retired.
Further questions? We've got about 15 more minutes before we're going to open up public comment again. I have a few questions for you, Chief Cooper. You had mentioned the 24, 36, and sometimes 72 hours of ability to sustain fire fighting. How does that compare to other states? And are we average? Are we worse than average? Or are we doing better as far as the local governments being able to sustain firefighting in that initial response?
Mr. Chairman, I'll answer it a little bit, but I'm going to ask for phone a friend here for some assistance from State Forester Norris as well. So my understanding is that the vast majority of Western states that surround us primarily focus on the initial attack. The local fire department responds to initial attack, does the best they can for the first operational period, and then releases them to go back to the fire station to get ready for the next call. And that's so critically important to understand is it's not just one fire call. When a lightning storm comes through, we're responding to multiple different new starts. And so when we got all of our resources committed to one fire, I've still got more fires and more car wrecks and more EMS incidents and everything else that we need to respond to. So it's really important to understand is that that's absolutely necessary, is we have to release those local resources back so they can go and be ready for the next initial attack. And the majority of the states that surround, I would even venture to say probably all of them, do exactly that model. They release the local resources back so they can get ready for the next initial attack. So the answer to your question is I think we're unique in the fact that we expect our local jurisdictions to maintain that long-term presence.
And I can just add to that. So as you saw, the fire personnel and then the forestry and fire staffing, what they sometimes refer as the militia, the support, right? We don't have the capacity to take over. Or what happens is you have now a BLM engine running the largest wildland fire in Wyoming's history on the house draw because there isn't an engine out there with fire leadership from the state, right? So we've become fully dependent on our federal partners to run these larger fires because you have to know how to order through interagency dispatch centers. You have to do all these things that is missing because the state doesn't I have I have 7 firefighters, 2 in Hella Base and 5 with the smoke busters. So there isn't anything else. And while all the other states, that's what's happening. And you're going to hear about that today. Is there, when the local get to a capacity, there's, and they're getting beyond capacity, there isn't an expectation from the state of Montana that county better handle a $60 million fire. No, the state comes in, says, you are volunteers, you did your job, and JR can speak to this because he experienced it on a short draw on many of these fires. We got this. We got it all. We're gonna cover all the costs. We're gonna deal with the billing. Counties don't bill each other. It's a totally different world in all these other Western states. And so, but we don't have that right now, if that makes sense. We're not taking over. What we're doing is ordering for a bunch of federal and state resources to come in and try and put these fires out. And that is what we are spending the majority of our time doing.
Forster Norris, you bring up another point that I wanted to address with Chief Cooper as well, and you're really the one that needs to answer this. So Chief Cooper brought up that there's a lack of the ability for moving resources from one entity to another as far as these county fire departments and so forth. So just looking at current situation, current processes, are those that need help able to contact you, and are you already at least requesting that? I know you don't have the ability to demand it, or you don't have any resources of your own to provide. Is there some line of communications through you or some other entity to move those resources if they're available?
Mr. Chairman, so right now we have a duty officer who is overseeing and really handling our resources. It takes quite a bit of coordination to send out the smoke busters. It takes quite a bit to mobilize and prioritize where that helicopter is going, the seats, all of those things. While we keep our leadership totally in the know too, right now, I don't have at my fingertips a bunch of resources. That's not, I think that's, people think that, but Sublette County needs to be responsible for Sublette County. And so, yes, I could have a county say, hey, we need this, but right now, until we get emergency rules put in place, there is no ability, because you have to have funding. So what's happening is the fire starts and then we can start ordering, because we have a fire that we're going to put that funding towards. There's no funding right now until we do emergency rules to move those resources in a place outside of the state resources, right? But then we don't have staff to staff an engine. So we are just there, and we depend very much on those federal agencies to bring in those severity resources, and that's what they do. They bring in the hand crews, they bring in the extra aviation for us. We do coordinate with them. Are aware of that. What happens though is when Colorado starts a fire in the Rocky Mountain region, all of that aviation goes to Colorado immediately, and that is exactly what happened on Pleasant Valley. So we were left with no aviation in the state of Wyoming, federal aviation. So that's when we're calling, like we are calling and begging Montana and saying, we need your aviation, and South Dakota. And so that's what happened is South Dakota and Montana took a large air tanker, or the 2 lats that came down were Alaska's on loan coming down. That came down for Pleasant Valley. So those are the type of things that are happening is we're in the background trying to get that local district what they need at that time. What we realized and what I would say was really clear from the counties is going into this next fire season, there's no ability for us to, like these other states, to just start hiring more seasonal staff, right? Washington's like, oh, well, if the feds are just going to reduce their numbers, we're just going to hire, 30 more engines, right? And 30 more staff. We're going to take care of it. Wyoming, I don't have that ability. So what I need to do is be extremely effective with the resources we have. And that's why we're going to try and do these emergency rules, so that at this time, when a county says that, we're going to start working through what does that coordination look like. Now, do I want to take all of those? Some of these counties can maybe do an engine for a couple days, right? So we're probably going to be having to pull in some other state resources when we do bringing in these additional support systems for the initial attack. Some of the counties may be able to give 3 days, a week. I mean, but that's going to take a workload to coordinate, right? So that is going to be added workload for us to have to coordinate that type of level of work. It's going to be added workload to try and coordinate anything between the 23 counties. There's not a system for that. That's not what we're set up for.
And my final question, Chief Fox, I know that during some of these fires last summer, you guys did a phenomenal job of protecting homes and structures. There was very few of those that were lost. But one of the things that you did is you covered an entire home in foam. As Chief Cooper was talking about the mitigation of distances for fuels, but I doubt very seriously the public understands very much what your capabilities are and how important it is that we maintain those capabilities. So I hope that in your public PR efforts that we can maybe inform the public of what we have capable of fighting fires, because I know that the homeowners were a little in shock when they saw the foam. It wouldn't have surprised me. I have experience in aircraft and shipboard firefighting, and we use foam all the time, but phenomenal job of having those types of resources available. And I hope you can educate the public that they are out there. It's normal to try to protect a house from a fire with this, and it's not a long-term damaging event. But do you have any comments on that?
Mr. Chairman, I think, State Forester Norris alluded to, when we do have these large fires, there's just not enough resources. We don't have enough engines to put an engine in every home. So we do have to get creative with foam and with aircraft and use the resources we have to do the most good for the most people. Normally in a typical fire season, in your communities, when a wildland fire starts, you're used to seeing 2 or 3 engines roll up and take care of it. When that fire turns into 10, 20,000 acres and 10 miles away, there's another 30 or 40,000 acres, you will not see the same amount of equipment. It's spread too thin. Mutual aid is far away in Wyoming, so everything takes a lot longer. State Forester Norris alluded to the fact that when we get to certain planning levels at a national level, that resource drawdown becomes even more critical. So as of, I think, 2 days ago, nationally, we're to planning level 3. It only goes to 5. When we get to those elevated planning levels, we are pulling resources from the East Coast. Several days mob time to get much of anything, if you can even get it. Typically, if you try to order a hotshot crew, if you try to order engines, if you try to order a management team in planning level 5, you will most likely be met with unable to fail within 24 hours. And we just keep trying to get them. So it definitely looks different as fire season progresses and what the community will see at their doorstep. So I appreciate that. And we will definitely be sharing our capabilities as well. And, what that looks like in reality.
Senator Smith.
I just have a question on, let's just say we tripled our air assets, so you didn't need to call in assets from Montana, but could we then, not every year you're going to need that, right? I mean, it's just some years are wet, some years are dry. And could you see a scenario where we could then lease out our equipment, our people, and make it profitable to the state of Wyoming?
Let's go with Forester Norris, and I think you'd already shared with us about the seats, how, we've funded a seats operation, but that's available to like California during the winter time. So if you could.
No, so Mr. Chairman, let me explain how we do contracting. So we're contracted either 90-day contracts, 120-day contracts. So, and they're exclusive to Wyoming. When they're Wyoming's. Now, we do bring in all sorts of crazy aviation, but that is all federal contracted aviation. When you see those other aviation in the sky, it's typically federal contracted, large air tankers, things like that. With that, and it's usually Forest Service too. So 70% of the firefighters and all the aviation contracting is through the U.S. Forest Service. One of the things we are looking at, just and I guess since you asked, is looking in coordination with the State Forest of New Mexico. New Mexico's fire season is different than Wyoming's fire season. Is there a way for one state to contract out a year-round contract, and then we share that aviation between the two states to reduce the costs of that helicopter, for example? So those are things that the states are starting to look at. We have state-to-state compacts also that we can go through. We are working on other ones with specifically state to state with Montana. So those are great ideas, is how do we take the assets that we have, and then again, as you're suggesting, maybe they go somewhere else. Right now they're exclusive and they're very tied to a very specific contract period of time, and that's all we have a budget for. If we were to change that flexibility and look at more year-round and things like that, yes, they would definitely go out, and yes, we would recoup those types of costs.
Follow up?
I think I understand. So the feds are involved with our air assets. Is that correct? The Forest Service?
Mr. Chairman, so we only have currently under contract one Type 3 helicopter and one medium. They're not involved in those. Those are ours. They're for initial attack, immediate support. We also have 4 single-engine air tankers under contract. 2 are located in Moreland right now. 2 are located in Casper. Now, all of that aviation is for immediate initial attack. That is what that is for. It is focused in on putting that fire out as quickly as possible to save us, all of us, the money and the fire, right? We want it out. When these fires go longer than these when they get beyond this initial attack, when they get beyond day 2, typically that's not our aviation on those fires. Typically by then our aviation is back out doing initial attack, and it's federal aviation.
Okay, Mr. Chair, but Forest Norris, thank you very much. I think that's great. I think we need to think outside the box here, and there's a lot of good ideas. We really have to do things differently. When you look at how Platte County fought fires this summer, really the air assets were the key. It was just critical, and Representative Harrelson will tell you that it was just they did a phenomenal job up there. So anyway, with that, I just think we'll talk offline, but let's get a plan together for this.
Thank you for that, Senator. I want to add a comment here too, that because Senator Smith discussed, current needs versus, trends. And as we looked at these other states, and hopefully we'll hear from some of them, a lot of them used a 5 and a 10-year average so that they could estimate what their future expenditures would be, what their needs for resources would be. And I hope that this committee will think about using a plan that allows us to take care of the worst and yet not have assets sitting around that don't need to be. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take it this next section if you're okay with that.
Yes, I am. And do we have any public comment that's in the room that would like to comment before we go to lunch break? Just raise your hand if you're interested. Okay. All right. See somebody back here. And do we have anyone online? Okay. Okay. So we'll leave the last 5 minutes for public comment. So you've got about 15 minutes here. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't belittle some of the points that Chief Cooper brought up, but the Wyoming Fire Service definitely does have recruitment retention issues of our volunteer firefighters. In my organization, anecdotally, in the last 30 years, we've probably lost 60% of our volunteer firefighters, similar to the national trend, which does affect the ability to staff multiple fires, staff the next call, and deliver those vital services. In November, after the fire season, for most of the fire season, the Wyoming Fire Service, we did look at a survey, and we surveyed fire chiefs, fire wardens, stakeholders to really identify those gaps in resources. So looking back at 2024, what were those things that you needed that you couldn't get, or that were days away, or the quantity was insufficient? Probably no surprise. One of the top items was aviation, which we've talked a little bit about this morning, and we have the legislature did fund those additional assets, so those will be put to good use this summer. I think it's important to note that aviation is vital, but aviation doesn't put out fires, does not put out wildland fires. It buys us time, it checks up the fires, it allows us to create some time and space to implement strategy and tactics and get boots on the ground, get engines in place, get hand crews in place to contain these fires. So just wanted to make that clarification. Absolutely vital, but it's not putting out fires. Next on the list is hand crews. We've talked a lot about the Smoke Buster program. I am personally the biggest fan of the Smoke Buster program. We utilize them extensively in Northeast Wyoming because they're close and because they're cost effective. To Forrester Norris's comments, for a couple bucks an hour, that's what the inmates program is for those firefighters, and they're available. So we use those resources extensively. Interestingly, in Wyoming, there's only 2 hand crews that are staffed and funded by the Forest Service and the BLM. One is staffed by the U.S. Forest Service, the Wyoming Hotshots out of Grable, and the other is the Devil's Canyon. It's a veterans hand crew, so they take members who have departed the military and they place them in those jobs if that's what they want to do, and they're out of Worland. Those are national assets. Typically, they're not available in Wyoming because they're going to the highest priority fires in the nation as determined by the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise. So 2 hand crews, which means when the counties, the state, when we're looking for boots on the ground for days, weeks, those resources are typically not available. So hand crews was definitely a need. Type 3 teams overhead. Going to the handout from earlier, Type 3 teams, those are moderate complex fires, typically fairly large, typically 7 to 14 day type fires, sometimes months. The command and general staff on those Type 3 teams, those qualifications to get to that level is, on average, probably somewhere you're looking at somebody who's spent 15, 20 years in wildland fire to obtain that level of qualification. To the forester's point, we're not seeing that longevity in state forestry. We're not seeing that longevity in the Wyoming Fire Service typically. So we rely heavily on the Forest Service, the BLM, to provide that overhead. Anecdotally, I think there's probably 3 or 4 Type 3 ICs at kind of that fire warden county level. But when I have Type 3 fires in Campbell County, as a Type 3 IC, I can't take over one of those fires because I've got fire warden duties. I'm now an agency administrator. And if Johnson County calls looking for a Type 3 IC, I can't abdicate my duties in Campbell County. So I become very limited. All of fire wardens in these positions become very limited because we have to take care of our jurisdiction first. So Type 3 teams, the overhead, that middle management task force leaders, division supervisors, these are positions that we phone a friend, and typically we're calling the Forest Service, the BLM, to see who they can shake loose to help manage these fires on state and private land. We talked about some additional, the additional burden on the financial staff and the administrative support staff that is on the counties for these large fires. Fire wardens spending months and months, spending their winters trying to parcel out invoices, equipment time reports, shift tickets, exhibit Bs, trying to put together these financial packages for reimbursement that go through the state. So the state definitely has a burden, but these fire wardens have to initiate all of those payments and the reimbursement process. So that was a need from the fire wardens and the chiefs as well. Staffed engines, we've talked quite a bit about the staffed engines and some dedicated staff, and a little bit back to those those type 4 fires. So just, 200-acre fire in Crook County, Weston County, Pickett County. We've hit that 48-hour mark. Our volunteers are tapped out. Our full-time folks may be tapped out trying to staff up engines again in their local jurisdictions. We really, as locals, we look for the state forestry, like, hey, can you provide an engine with a Type 4 IC that can take this fire for the next couple days just to make sure that it stays inside a containment? Continue to mop up with maybe the smoke busters and just take this fire for the next couple of days until it's closed out. So, and finally, the preposition, we've talked a little about preposition. Again, that's that proactive resource allocation. We know we're in high fire danger. We know we have red flag days. We know we already have a fire or two that we're dealing with, and we're not sure if we're going to be able to handle the next one. Being able to get a hold of state forestry, and I think, we talked briefly about what is and what is not inside of state forestry's control. If those resources that are prepositioned are coming through the fire suppression account, those would be under the duty officer's control at state forestry. So if they were maybe positioned in Gillette, but Johnson County had a fire break loose, the duty officer could move those assets under their control over to Johnson County and initiate that initial attack with local resources. One thing you may not see on this list is heavy equipment. I think it's important to recognize in Wyoming, I know for my county, we utilize that local road and bridge extensively for our heavy equipment needs. Dozers, blades, almost exclusively we use our local road and bridge for our heavy equipment needs, and we absolutely could not do it without them. I know many counties are in a similar spot with that. Some of the districts may contract with some private companies, but at least locally, I know our road and bridge is vital to our success. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions for Chief Fox? Seeing none. Chief Fox, on your last point of equipment, there was a lot of volunteers when the fires got so huge. Some of those were equipment companies. Have you looked at ways to accommodate those volunteers and incorporate them and keep them safe while they're offering to help with this dangerous activity?
Now, Mr. Chairman, so earlier, State Forester Norris commented about some of those emergency contracts, EERAs. So that's emergency equipment rental agreements, and we utilize those quite extensively for resources that were under our control. So if we had a need for dozers, if we had a need for blades under the fire department's operational control, we would contact State Forestry and we would get them in the pipeline to get an emergency equipment rental agreement in place. Now, if they're under our control, we did increase our communications with them. So we now carry banks of radios, portable radios that we can hand to that equipment. They're under our supervision, so we don't let them get too far, just because of the training and accountability aspect. Now, if landowners, contact different equipment companies, that's outside of our control and certainly within their rights to seek their own equipment and accomplish their objectives. But if it's inside of the fire department's control and that incident commander's control, we do sign them up, and those invoices do get processed through the EFSA account if it's an EFSA fire, if that answers your question.
Well, it does to some extent. If a company was volunteering their equipment and their personnel to fight the fires, would you still go to a contract through the forester just so that insurance and things like that were covered, and then forego the invoicing portion of it?
So what we saw last summer was a lot of companies initially volunteering, and we did use them. Obviously, these companies, their livelihood is in oil and gas or other industries that they need to pull that equipment. So we definitely had equipment that came, we put it to work, and they went on to accomplish their business objectives. There was equipment that we put under contract because we needed them for, in the case of some of the suppression repair, 2 weeks. And so that's the equipment we most assuredly put under contract. And it's not an easy process. You know, with a staff of 1 or 2 at State Forestry to do those contracts, it takes days. So we did put that equipment under contract, and they were compensated for their time. So I guess to answer your question more succinct, we did use them usually within 12, 24 hours. A lot of those folks are going back to what they need. Appreciate that assistance. But the ones that were willing to stay and it was financially in their interest, we put them under contract and utilize them as well.
And along those lines, some ranchers have invested in their own firefighting equipment. Do you have relationships with these ranchers and coordinate with them at all, or is it just they're on their own to protect their assets and talk to their neighbors, or do they go through you? Is there any way that you're keeping track of those assets and what they're doing so that you can ensure that they're not getting too far out there to where their lives are in danger and going to call your assets off of a fire to help out?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, I would say. Certainly some local landowners, before last season, during last season, they did purchase, some equipment, sprayers, some, surplus engines. We did offer a weekend training similar to the training that Representative Harrelson went to, simply for private landowners, that they didn't have to sign up for the fire department. It was, we will offer this training if you want it. We had about a dozen folks that participated in that. To answer the second part of your question, we did, all of our battalion chiefs will have 6 portable radios now. So if we come to an incident and we have some local landowners with suppression equipment, we can give them a radio, increase their communication, their situational awareness, because we do run into issues with communications where we have aviation assets overhead, and routinely, these incidents are big, they're spread out, we can't keep track of folks, and they get in a position where we're trying to utilize those helicopters, air tankers, and they will not drop unless we can clear the line. So it's in everybody's interest to keep those communication lines open and to understand where we're headed and what's overhead, and we can get those aviation assets put to use.
And along those same lines, Representative Harrelson brought something up when we were first discussing this in committee, and that is private insurance companies hiring private firefighting crews. Have you experienced that, and what kind of difficulties has that created?
We definitely have experienced that. It may be a little bit new to Wyoming. So I'm part of an incident management team, and it's not new nationally. I think 7, 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, when these first became more prevalent, there was a lot of uncertainty from an incident command perspective, and how do we make sure everybody's on the same page? The incident action plan, communication, safety, evacuations. Fast forward last year on Flat Rock specifically, we did have a couple different insurance company engines, and it seems to work well. These contract engines, they have a list of their clients that they are under contract to help protect. So there's a very open dialogue with the incident commanders, with that division supervisor. We know where these homes are, where they're going to protect them. We make sure that they are tied into the action plan, the communications. It really works fairly seamlessly now. I think we've worked some of the bugs out over the last 5, 10 years with these companies, and we understand their role, and they most assuredly understand the role of the incident commander, the incident command team, and what we're trying to accomplish. So I would say it's much better than it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Thank you. That's good news. All right. All right. Any other questions for this panel?
And Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I'd like to just, I want to touch base on this contracting concept, and you asked about if they volunteered or not. because when we're in an EFSA fire, we do want these things under contract, but even if it's zero. So many times there's things called land use agreements, water use agreements, that we do make sure the airport that we're using, we go into a contract agreement for the use of that to have the medevac there. And we sign up the use of these fire halls. All of those type of things do go under contract agreements, even if they're zero, so that we don't get called back by the private landowner and asked to pay for the loss of grass, this or that. It's in the agreed upon contract. So that takes a ton, that's what our foresters, the agency administrators, that's what my one person, Sheila, is doing constantly when these fires are starting to occur, is we want any piece of equipment that's out there under some sort of agreed upon contract, especially if they stay beyond what we would consider a mutual aid period. So just to give you some information on that, what we typically like to do is if you're going to donate something, donate your food or things like that. And then when it comes to private insurance, Senate File 152 had that specifically stated in the state forester's duties. We are working on that. We have met with those type of companies. We're looking at maybe a permitting, some sort of process to better standardize how they come in, who they coordinate with. We just have had a lot of work to do, and we're going to get there with that group in particular. So I wanted to address that as well.
Thank you. All right. With that, I will open up public comment. We've got a couple of minutes here, and sir, you had mentioned you wanted to. Sure, if I may. Counties could offer their public comment in that next session a little later. Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. So if you're going to be here in that next session, we'll just make sure you get that opportunity. Absolutely. All right. And we have no one online right now. Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead and adjourn, and we'll return here at 1 p.m.